Chapter 395. The Heavenly Worlds. Dragon Altar Booknet. Longtonshu. Near Gu-Nan's God Kingdom, two figures were pacing back and forth. They looked around the surrounding space, as if they were looking for a suitable place to ambush. Elder Z Luo will return sooner or later, and so will Gu-Nan. He has just returned to the Heavenly Worlds, and has yet to take control of everything. This is our best chance. One of them was a monk, and the other was a Taoist priest. The Taoist priest was speaking. However, the two of them were a little strange. The monk had short hair and carried a long sword on his back, looking more like the legendary sword cultivators. The Taoist priest held a horsetail whisk and wore a Taoist crown on his head, but he wore a neat Buddhist robe. The gold and red colors intertwined and were very eye-catching. The monk didn't look like a monk, and the Taoist priest didn't look like a Taoist priest. They were a famous monk and Taoist duo in the Heavenly Worlds, the Sword Arhat and the Buddhist Taoist priest. The Sword Arhat agreed with the Buddhist Taoist priest, but still felt a little sullen. That Duan guy has a grudge against Gu-Nan, but he's using us as cannon fodder? There's nothing we can do. The Buddhist Taoist priest sighed. Who asked the sect master to return, but we even got the sun wrong and let the Real Sun die at the hands of Gu-Nan. The Sword Arhat sneered. Isn't it all because of Luwan? If he hadn't switched people back then. Forget it. The Buddhist Taoist priest waved his hand and lightly flicked his horsetail whisk, interrupting him. Only by killing Gu-Nan will we have a chance to make up for it. Be prepared, we can't let him return to the astral plane. The Sword Arhat nodded silently. Before Lorenza attained the Tao, Gu-Nan had single-handedly fought against Feng Chaoyun in the astral plane. From then on, no one under the 13 skies dared to say they could defeat Gu-Nan, because as long as he hid in the astral plane, no one would be able to do anything to him. Xie Yun had failed again. As one of the 9 people who had come here from the all heavens, Xie Yun's aptitude could be said to be one of the best. The only one who could compare to her was in Tianxing. Liang Ruxin was the most experienced and the steadiest among the 9, but in terms of aptitude, he still couldn't compare to these two kids. But even so, Xie Yun, who was 16 years old this year, was destined to be the last among the 9 to get the route. She might not even get the route because Gu-Nan's return was not far away. Gunner expert doesn't suit you. Gu-Nan placed a data sheet in front of the girl and said indifferently. After several challenges, Gu-Nan had long realized the problem, but he had never mentioned it to Xie Yun until she came to ask for help. Why? Xie Yun lowered her head to take a look. She was blinded by the data that she couldn't understand. She asked, unconvinced. Your knowledge of firearms is seriously lacking, whether it's the manufacturing or the assembly of firearms, let alone the modification that suits you best. Gu-Nan paused for a moment, then pointed at the paper and said, This is the name of every firearm you've used. You don't even know what they're called and what their functions are. How are you supposed to use them? I love firearms, Xie Yun said loudly, and isn't the more expensive the better? Gu-Nan shook his head. It was undoubtedly very embarrassing for her to play with guns like this. Oh, speaking of which, there really was a route that suited her. Gu-Nan was startled, but it did remind him of a very special route. There were too many routes that players could take in their professions in the game. Even Gu-Nan couldn't remember all of them. The routes he had written for the 9 people were just routes that were more cost-effective and easier to take. If you just like to play with guns, you can try this route. Gu-Nan quickly lowered his head and wrote down a piece of information before handing it to Xie Yun. Xie Yun looked down in confusion, only to see the words, Krypton Expert, written at the top of the paper. The official name of the Krypton Expert should be Gold Devouring Expert. This route was very special. Players could obtain a natal weapon and then upgrade it by spending money. The natal weapon could be whatever the player wanted, but it couldn't be changed after the initial route was chosen. It could only evolve. The upgrade of the natal weapon would also bring about the player's own upgrade. To put it simply, one could only become stronger by spending money. Strengthening by consuming gold? Xie Yun understood this time because the logic of the upgrade of the Krypton expert was indeed very simple. Just spend money. Moreover, the gold referred to here was really the metal itself. Any other form of currency or valuable items were useless. When she saw the introduction of the natal weapon, her eyes lit up. Can I choose a gun? Of course. I've decided on this. Xie Yun came and left in a hurry, but it didn't affect what happened. Gu Nan sat in the flowery divine kingdom, witnessing with his own eyes the birth of the second unification of paths. It had been almost 2 days since the anomaly in the divine kingdom. The anomaly in the Pantheon world was now so intense that even level 4 could sense it. Elder Zi Luo was breaking through, and everyone outside was waiting silently for the critical point to arrive. Breaking through was a slow and drawn-out process. It couldn't be done immediately by shouting "break through." It was like adding strands of straw to a camel's body. It might seem like the last straw had undergone a qualitative change, but in reality, it was no different from the previous straw. It's here. Xueren's voice rang in Gu Nan's ears. The number 1 swordsman in the world had appeared beside Gu Nan at some point in time. There was a relieved smile on his face. You seem nervous. Gu Nan could see the worry in the depths of his eyes. Of course. Xueren smiled casually. If the old man fails to break through, I'm afraid we'll have to rebuild the astral plane here. There's no such thing as a guaranteed success in unification of paths. No one dared to say that they would definitely succeed in unification of paths. Xueren and Gu Nan had openly offended the 13 heavens. Once the news of Elder Zi Luo's failure to break through spread, their astral planes would probably be destroyed immediately. Even if Song Fei didn't do it himself and didn't say anything, there were plenty of people willing to do it for him. He didn't need to say anything at all. Almost at the same time Xueren spoke, Gu Nan saw a beam of purple light in the sky. It was as if something had awakened in the depths of the flowery divine kingdom and was shooting toward the sky. However, at this moment, a beam of light came from the east and landed directly on the beam of purple light. The beam of light from the east seemed to have pierced through space and hit the purple light the moment it lit up. It was only then that people had a chance to see the formation of the beam of light clearly. It was clearly a ruler, simple and old-fashioned, just like the ones used in private schools in the countryside. div class equals other_links, txt download address. Phone reading. For easier reading next time you can bookmark this page. Chapter 435 Chapter 4. Chapter 396. Of course, this wasn't an ordinary ruler. It was Song Fei's famous magic tool. It wasn't called the Sky Measuring Ruler, it was called the Ruler. Dragon Altar Book Network. Song Fei had started cultivating in a private school in a small plane. This was the ruler he used back then, so it didn't have a name. Later on, a disciple asked Song Fei what his most famous Dharma artifact was called. Song Fei replied with exactly these 4 words. It was called Ruler. At the most critical moment of Elder Zi Luo's unification, Song Fei finally made his move. He used his magic tool to attack from afar, and it actually penetrated the plane wall. Song Fei. Xueren looked at him coldly and gloomily. He wasn't surprised that Song Fei would attack. It was obvious. On the contrary, if Elder Zi Luo didn't do anything, Xueren would suspect that there was a conspiracy. What made Xueren feel heavy was that Lorenza didn't stop him. This was her divine kingdom. It was impossible for her not to notice the arrival of the ruler. Of course, it was impossible for her to betray the organization. If she really did, she could just kill everyone. There was no need to go through so much trouble. So there was only one possibility. Daphne. Lorenza stared coldly at the elegant lady in front of her. Her body was surrounded by a green barrier. Even though this was her god kingdom, and it would only take an instant for her to break through the other party's restrictions, she had already missed the most crucial opportunity. The moment the man appeared was the exact moment the ruler appeared. Daphne, the goddess of nature. There shouldn't be any communication between the highest levels of the world and the world of God. So Lorenza didn't expect that someone would collude with the other side to stop Elder Z. Luo's unification. Why? Lorenza asked coldly. The blood sea destroyed the green barrier immediately, but it didn't mean anything. The ruler had long since disappeared, but the influence it left behind was still fermenting. It's not hard to understand, Daphne said in a gentle voice. She was a mature lady with a noble aura. No one wants to see you rise to power and become a colossus that even the main gods can't control. The Divine Gods Association had never existed before. At least, it was the first time it had caught the attention of a main god. It had gone from a small, unknown organization to a super-organization with a Lord God at its helm, and now, it was going to have a second Tao integration stage, super-mighty figure. As long as the Lord Gods weren't blind, they wouldn't sit idly by and watch the Heavenly Deity Association grow. Of course, there were also conflicts of interest between the main god. Wanting them to join forces was also a joke. At most, they could only watch others take the lead. Daphne was the one who stood up for them, and the reason she did it was very simple. She wasn't afraid of offending Lorenza at all. When Lorenza was still the goddess of flowers, this goddess of nature was a stumbling block in her path. On the other hand, Daphne also viewed the former as a powerful pursuer, and had often suppressed her in the open and in the dark. The two of them had never been on good terms. Since they didn't know each other, he wasn't afraid of offending them. Your power is very interesting. The goddess of nature smiled and waved her hand. Then, her figure slowly disappeared. Song Fei, it's still that Song Fei. Lu Wen lightly took a sip of sake, a look of understanding appearing on his face. Lu Wen had made his debut very late, so he hadn't seen the battle between Song Fei and Elder Z. Luo. However, he had seen the style of Song Fei's chess pieces. This saint-level figure, known as the world's teacher, was like a genius swordsman when he attacked. He could break through all falsehoods and hit a vital point with a single strike. Whether it's the Heavenly Deity Association or the main god, they're just external forces in the end. Duan Wenqi also sighed softly. As long as Elder Z. Luo doesn't reach Tao integration, Song Fei will be as steady as Mount Tai. The previous silence was only for the sake of this fatal blow. This was Song Fei. Others only see the Heavenly Deity Association's power, but he sees its weakness. Lu Wen smiled and shook his head. But in this case, won't your arrangements be for nothing? Duan Wenqi pursed his lips. It's better if it's for nothing. Of course, while the various heavens marveled at Song Fei's sharpness, the atmosphere in the flowery divine kingdom was incomparably solemn. Taoist Spirit Yang had already appeared and met up with everyone, but even Crazy Fist no longer had a casual expression on his face. All of them wore stern expressions. Back then, they had followed Elder Z. Luo here in order to avoid a small probability of an accident happening. They hadn't expected that an even smaller probability of an accident would happen. Gu Nan was also here, but he was calmer than the others. Perhaps it was better to say that he had already gone through hundreds of battles and was extremely experienced. It wasn't like he had never encountered a situation where a divine kingdom had been destroyed in the game. It was just going to happen again. There were even some players who felt that they weren't prepared enough and would be easily exposed once they reached level 10, so they decided to destroy their divine kingdoms and start all over again. We still have a chance. Elder Z. Luo's voice finally rang out, giving everyone hope. The old man slowly walked over from the void. His appearance wasn't much different from before, but his expression was a little more ostentatious. You succeeded? Taoist Spirit Yang couldn't help but blurt out when he saw this. Lorenza also appeared, but she didn't say anything. She only frowned slightly at Elder Z. Luo. Both succeeded and failed. Elder Z. Luo told everyone to sit down and then gave his answer. 10 years. He looked at Schwerin and said, I only have 10 years. I can help you fend off Song Fei and Zhou Jiming, but you have to succeed in the end. 10 years? Schwerin's eyes flashed as he repeated Elder Zi Luo's words. Adding a time limit to the word succeed was a huge pressure on anyone, even Schwerin, who was said to be the closest to succeeding. Elder Zi Luo nodded lightly. Place the Divine God Society's headquarters in the Violet Civ Heaven. If you succeed, I'll have a chance at survival. Otherwise, everything will be over. Schwerin lowered his head in silence. Elder Zi Luo looked at Gu Nan and the others. If things don't go according to plan, I'm afraid it'll be difficult for you to leave. If you don't want to take this risk, why don't you just stay here? If they stayed in the Pantheon world, they would at least have Lorenza as their backer. The natural relationship between them gave them a foundation for an alliance. Crazy Fist didn't hesitate and said, I've already fought my way through this place. It's time to go back and meet an old friend. He had come here because he didn't want to take the risk, but now he was faced with an even more difficult choice. He didn't want to be cautious this time. Elder Taoist Spirit Son was silent for a moment, then said, I'll stay. Schwerin looked up in surprise, as if he didn't understand why his old friend would make such a decision. Elder Taoist Spirit Son smiled. I'm afraid of death. Schwerin could only shake his head, clearly not believing Elder Taoist Spirit Son's words. What about you? Elder Zi Luo turned to look at Gu Nan. Can we go now? Gu Nan asked. 10 years. We're still in a bit of a rush. div class equals, other_links, txt download address, mobile reading. To make it easier for you to read next time, you can bookmark this page. Chapter 436 of course. Chapter 397. To the true higher-ups of the All Heavens, the ruler that had mysteriously appeared in the All Heavens realm was no secret. Latest chapter therefore, just when everyone thought that the old man would never appear in the All Heavens again. He had returned, and he had brought all the Star-Lords who had left the All Heavens with him. He had set up the headquarters of the Divine God Society in Ziluo Heaven in a high-profile manner. The Ziluo Heaven, which had been a free plane for tens of thousands of years, now had a true master after the return of the Ziluo Heaven. At the same time, the term 13 Heavens had officially become a thing of the past, and they were now called the 14 Heavens. But what truly puzzled everyone was that Song Fei of the Sure Dao Heaven had not expressed any opinion on the return of the Ziluo Heaven, much less his actions. Similarly, the old man did not express any dissatisfaction towards the ruler. It was as if nothing had happened between the two of them. This strange attitude caused the onlookers to sink into silence. If not for the fact that the Ziluo Heaven's power could not be faked, they would have thought that they were dreaming. It was only when one of Song Fei's disciples had inadvertently revealed a few things during a conversation that the term 10 years gradually spread throughout the world. Subsequently, the rest of the All Heavens all tacitly agreed to this, and the news spread more and more. But all of this happened later, and everyone's attention was on the Ziluo Heaven, so it had little to do with Gu Nan. What really concerned Gu Nan was something else. The first thing he did upon returning to the All Heavens realm was return to his divine kingdom. However, just as he was about to descend, a sword and a horsetail whisk appeared in front of him at the same time. This attack, which had been hidden for who knew how long and had no warning, struck directly at Gu Nan. Of course, he had no intention of dodging. The sword instantly pierced through Gu Nan's neck, while the horsetail whisk smashed heavily into his forehead. The strong impact nearly shattered space itself, but Gu Nan did not move an inch. The scene seemed to freeze in an instant. Gu Nan's lack of reaction caused the hearts of the two ambushers to turn cold. Let's go. The sword Arhut quickly pulled out his sword and realized that he couldn't do anything. He quickly retreated, but then he saw that his companion couldn't retreat. Buddhist Taoist priest was just a step too slow, and he found that he could no longer pull himself away. This was because the horsetail whisk in his hand was being held tightly by Gu Nan. Buddhist Taoist priest was a Star Lord who had yet to reach world grade, but had the strength of a Tier 7 Star Lord. Yet, in front of Gu Nan, he was completely powerless. All of his laws, insights, and astral energy became a joke when he took the initiative to offer them to him. Sword Arhat was already regretting it at this time. They thought that Gu Nan was only special in the astral world. He had just taken charge of the astral world, and was not very strong. However, they did not expect that in terms of personal strength, the other party would far surpass their expectations. In order to ambush the other party, they had purposely chosen to engage in close combat and had even delivered themselves to their doorstep. Bang! Gu Nan grabbed the horsetail whisk with one hand, but there was already a sneer on his face. He punched straight at the Buddhist Taoist priest's head, kicked his abdomen with one foot and kneed him with the other. His target was the sword Arhat. This set of movements was done smoothly, causing Gu Nan's whole body to twist into a strange posture, but it was full of mechanical beauty. Gu Nan was a virtual combat master, after all. His understanding of small-scale combat was really not weaker than these Star Lords who fought using laws all year round. After the initial shock, Buddhist Taoist priest no longer hesitated. He directly let go of the horsetail whisk in his hand and retreated. However, his speed of retreat was obviously not as fast as Gu Nan, so Buddhist Taoist priest could only barely tilt his head to avoid Gu Nan's fatal punch. However, his abdomen could not avoid the kick. Buddhist Taoist priest felt as if his abdomen had been hit by a star. Ever since he became a Star Lord, he had never experienced a serious injury. This kind of pain was especially unfamiliar to him. However, Gu Nan did not let up. Relying on the previous knee strike to avoid the sword Arhat, he immediately caught up to Buddhist Taoist priest and punched him twice. Wait! Seeing that he could not stop the other party, the sword Arhat suddenly shouted, "Don't you want to know who sent us here? Someone is secretly plotting against you." Bang! Gu Nan's fist landed on Buddhist Taoist priest's head, instantly causing the latter's head to explode. His soul and true soul were destroyed. "I don't want to." Gu Nan shook off the bloodstains on his hand and turned around. The ambush that came from near the Divine Kingdom was not something that Gu Nan took to heart. As the players' levels increased, they provoked more and more enemies. This was something that Gu Nan had long since gotten used to. The ambush between the two ended with the instant death of Buddhist Taoist priest and the escape of the sword Arhat. The two of them did not die together. Although the body of the evil god was powerful, it was not omnipotent. Simply put, Gu Nan's goal was to be invincible within 5 meters. What happened outside was none of his business. If the Star Lords were far enough away from him, it would be difficult for Gu Nan to catch up and kill them. After all, these people had many life-saving methods. On the contrary, after this incident, the divine emissaries that were about to welcome back Gu Nan and the others all activated their explosive state. During the days that Gu Nan disappeared, whether it was the group of old subordinates led by Redtail, who were loyal to Gu Nan, or the new divine emissaries led by Whitebrook, who came from the Bone World, they all realized the importance of Gu Nan. Usually, it seemed that the Divine Kingdom could operate as usual without Gu Nan. However, the actual situation was not that simple. Without Gu Nan, the Divine Kingdom would have no goal. No one would start a Divine Kingdom war, and no one would spend the accumulated points. The Divine Kingdom's development was far slower than before. And when the Divine Kingdom's development stagnated, the divine emissaries naturally could not enjoy the benefits of development, whether it was in pursuit of strength or power. Thus, in a situation where everyone competed to perform, in a short 4 hours, the information on the monk and Taoist duo was placed in front of Gu Nan's table. "That's pretty fast," Gu Nan said after taking a look. "The sword Arhat and Buddhist Taoist priest are quite obvious among the Star Lords. That's why they didn't hide," Redtail quickly replied. Gu Nan nodded and looked at the information. He was actually not suited to be a leader. He was not even qualified to be a manager. After all, he was just a gaming otaku. All he knew was playing games and killing people in the game. That was all. Fortunately, as long as he had enough power, Gu-nan did not need to fear anyone's betrayal. There would even be a group of people who would spontaneously gather around him. All abilities were important in this world, and the ability to control the life and death of others was the most important. Div class equals other_links, txt download address. Phone reading. For convenience of reading next time, you can bookmark this time. Chapter 437 Chapter 4. Chapter 398. Astral World. Dragon Altar Book Network. Longtonshu. Red stayed in her palace as usual, looking at the boundless starry sky calmly. Compared to when Gu-nan was still here, Red looked much more haggard. Clearly, the battle with Zwa back then had a greater impact on her than expected. On this day, a figure slowly appeared in the silent and empty astral palace. At the same time, a few figures appeared and blocked in front of the newcomer. They were the guards of the astral palace. But after seeing the newcomer's appearance, the guards quickly retreated. Clearly, they were already familiar with the newcomer. Someone else is here? Red was still sitting on her throne, looking calmly forward. Young Lady Nogue was slowly walking over. Ever since the battle back then, the two of them had become good allies. The weakened astral world had attracted many covetous eyes. Red's power could not withstand too much consumption. It was young Lady Nogue who helped to repel the enemies every time. Nogue did not answer directly. Instead, she said, "Your guards are getting better and better at hiding themselves." Even when Nogue had just arrived, she did not notice the appearance of these guards. Clearly, Red had invested a lot of effort in this area. Red smiled and said, "After staying in the quiet for many years, I found that I like this kind of environment." In the past, Red's palace was very lively. Until Zwa arrived and Qian Han betrayed her guards, it became quiet. Young Lady Nogue did not smile. She said with a sullen face, "Whether you have recovered from what happened back then or not, we are in trouble this time." Red's expression did not change. She seemed indifferent. "Who is it?" "Gu-nan." Young Lady Nogue forcefully spat out these two words. Her expression was a little strange. Red fell into a long silence. After a long time, she slowly said, "So it's him." When Red heard this name, she still thought of the battle back then. She attacked from afar. At that time, Gu-nan, who was barely a Star Lord, had blocked one attack and fled in panic. But in the short span of a dozen years, which was like a nap to the Star Masters, this person had already returned with a completely different face. Red didn't ask where Wu Gue got the information because if it really was Gu-nan, the moment he made a move, the entire heavens would know. What was Gu-nan's current status? He was a core member of the Heavenly Deity Society, the youngest Star Master in history, and he was able to fight against Feng Chaoyun of the Graceful Sky all by himself in a sense. The pressure that Gu-nan brought to them was even greater than Zwa's in the past. At least Zwa had an obvious weakness. Red had already prepared a backup plan to deal with him. What weakness did Gu-nan have? Those who had seen his resume would realize that ever since Gu-nan had started his career, he had never suffered a true defeat. Facing an opponent whose strength far exceeded his own, he was still able to escape unscathed. This was undoubtedly a glorious achievement. Because of the existence of the Celestial Society, if it weren't for the 10-year limit, there would have been even more people supporting Gu-nan. His people have already arrived? Red's gaze swept across the starry sky. She saw divine servants descending from the sky in every star domain. Just like the rumors say. Wu Gue sighed. They don't fear pain or death. Most of them aren't human. I wonder where he found these fellows. Forget it, I have to give it a try. Gu-nan stood in the starry sky of the central star domain, accompanied by Redtail. Aren't you going to see your fellow clansmen? Gu-nan looked at Redtail, who was commanding the divine servants to descend to the ground and begin the slaughter. Guan Hongchen went to pick up her family? Yes. Red Tail nodded. It's not just her. A few divine envoys from the astral realm are planning to bring some of their relatives back to the divine nation. Gu Nan didn't have any objections to this. He didn't lack points. Letting the divine envoys bring their relatives back would obviously make it easier for them to supervise them. After all the divine servants had been arranged, Red Tail let out a long sigh. I don't know what to say when I see my clansmen. Of course, there were a few of her good friends in the clan, but in theory, they were all targets to be slaughtered. You're the victor now. You can say anything. Gu Nan patted her on the shoulder. Go. Remember to leave a group of children behind. Red Tail paused, as if she couldn't believe that Gu Nan had said that. Since when did this person think for others? And he even asked her to leave seeds behind? The Green Hill clan's reproduction rate isn't bad. You can come back in a few years, Gu Nan said matter-of-factly. Red Tail went to Green Hill clan in the end. As for whether she would follow Gu Nan's instructions, Gu Nan didn't really care. The idea of leaving seeds behind was just something he said casually. Who knew what would happen in a few years, and whether or not the astral realm could be saved depended on Red's attitude. Just as Gu Nan was thinking about it, Red's figure appeared as expected. You two are on the same side? Gu Nan looked at Girl No Gue, who appeared at the same time, a little surprised. Now, No Gue's strength had improved quite a bit compared to back then. At the very least, she had obtained her own astral realm, which was at least level 6. Of course, it was more likely that her astral realm had always existed, but she had finally succeeded in transforming it into a demonic Buddha realm that belonged solely to her. Even as the reincarnation of a powerful being, Girl No Gue's speed of advancement was already ridiculously fast. Still, compared to Gu Nan, who was even more ridiculous, she was left far behind. Red did not immediately speak in response to Gu Nan's surprise. Instead, Girl No Gue spoke up. We can give you whatever you want. Do you really have to attack the astral realm? I want people's lives. Gu Nan shrugged nonchalantly. If you're willing to provide it, I'm more than happy to accept such a partnership. Red finally smirked. You mean I'll painstakingly cultivate cultivators for you to kill? No. Gu Nan waved his hand and corrected her sternly. It's you who nurtures the cultivators, and I'll kill my people. I don't mind them resisting. Red's gaze gradually turned cold. She looked at Gu Nan. Then give it a try. Even if she was seriously injured, even if astral realm was only inherited, even if he hadn't had the time to manage the astral realm for a long time, this was still his astral realm. Not just anyone could come and wreak havoc here. The last dignity of a world-level Star Lord. Endless red began to descend, wrapping Gu Nan inside. It was as if his entire world had turned red. Give it a try. 2 calm words came from the red. div class equals, other_links, txt download address. Phone reading. To make it easier to read next time, you can bookmark to record this. Chapter 439 Chapter 4. Chapter 399. Astral World. Dragon Altar Book Network. Red stayed in her palace as usual, looking at the boundless starry sky calmly. Compared to when Gu Nan was still here, Red looked much more haggard. Clearly, the battle with Zhuozhuo back then had a greater impact on her than expected. On this day, a figure slowly appeared in the silent and empty astral palace. At the same time, a few figures appeared and blocked in front of the newcomer. They were the guards of the astral palace. But after seeing the newcomer's appearance, the guards quickly retreated. Clearly, they were very familiar with the newcomer. Someone else is here? Red was still sitting on her throne, calmly looking forward. Young girl No Gue was slowly walking over. Ever since that battle, the two of them had become good allies. The weakened astral world had attracted many covetous eyes. Red's power could not withstand too much consumption. It was young girl No Gue who helped to repel the enemies every time. No Gue did not answer directly. Instead, she said, "Your guards are getting better and better at hiding themselves." Even when No Gue had just arrived, she did not notice the appearance of these guards. Clearly, Red had invested a lot of effort in this area. Red smiled and said, "After staying in silence for many years, I found that I like this kind of environment." In the past, Red's palace was very lively. Until Zuo arrived and Qian Han betrayed her guards, it became quiet. Young girl No Gue did not smile. She said with a sullen face, "Whether you have recovered from what happened back then or not, we are in trouble this time." The expression on Red's face did not change. She seemed indifferent. "Who is it?" "Gunan." Young girl No Gue forcefully spat out these two words. Her expression was a little strange. Red fell into a long silence. After a long time, she slowly said, "So it's him." When Red heard this name, she thought of the battle back then. She attacked from afar. At that time, Gu Nan, who was barely a Star Lord, had blocked one attack and fled in panic. But in the short span of a dozen years, which was like a nap to the Star Masters, this person had already returned with a completely different face. Red didn't ask where Wu Gue got the information because if it really was Gu Nan, the moment he made a move, the entire heavens would know. What was Gu Nan's current status? He was a core member of the Heavenly Deity Society, the youngest Star Master in history, and he was able to fight against Feng Chaoyun of the Graceful Sky all by himself. In a sense, the pressure that Gu Nan brought to them was even greater than Zuo's was in the past. At least Zuo's had an obvious weakness. Red had already prepared a backup plan to deal with him. What weakness did Gu Nan have? Those who had seen his resume would realize that ever since Gu Nan had started his career, he had never suffered a true defeat. Facing an opponent whose strength far exceeded his own, he was still able to escape unscathed. This was undoubtedly a glorious achievement. Because of the existence of the Celestial Society, if it weren't for the 10-year limit, there would have been even more people supporting Gu Nan. His people have already arrived? Red's gaze swept across the starry sky. She saw divine servants descending from the sky in every star domain. Just like the rumors say. Wu Gue sighed. They don't fear pain or death. Most of them aren't human. I wonder where he found these fellows. Forget it, I have to give it a try. Gu Nan stood in the starry sky of the central star domain, accompanied by Red Tail. Aren't you going to see your fellow clansmen? Gu Nan looked at Red Tail, who was commanding the divine servants to descend and begin the slaughter. Guan Hongqian went to pick up her family? Yes. Red Tail nodded. It's not just her. A few divine envoys from the astral realm are planning to bring some friends and relatives back to God Nation. Gu Nan didn't have any objections to this. He didn't lack points. Letting the divine envoys bring their relatives back would obviously make it easier for them to supervise them. After all the divine servants had been arranged, Red Tail let out a long sigh. I don't know what to say when I see my clansmen. Of course, there were a few of her good friends in the clan, but in theory, they were all targets to be slaughtered. You're the victor now. You can say anything. Gu Nan patted her on the shoulder. Go, and remember to leave a group of children behind. Red Tail paused, as if she couldn't believe that Gu Nan had said that. Since when did this person think for others? And even asked her to leave seeds behind? The Green Hill clan's reproduction rate isn't bad. You can come back in a few years, Gu Nan said matter-of-factly. Red Tail went to Green Hill clan in the end. As for whether she would follow Gu Nan's instructions, Gu Nan didn't really care. The idea of leaving seeds behind was just something he said casually. Who knew what would happen in a few years, and whether or not the astral realm could be saved depended on Red's attitude. Just as Gu Nan was thinking, Red's figure appeared as expected. You two are in cahoots now? Gu Nan looked at Girl No Return, who appeared at the same time, a little surprised in his eyes. Now, No Return's strength had improved quite a bit compared to back then. At the very least, she had obtained her own astral realm, which was at least level 6. Of course, it was more likely that her astral realm had always existed, but she had finally succeeded in transforming it into a demonic Buddha realm that belonged solely to her. Even as the reincarnation of a powerful being, Girl No Return's speed of advancement was already ridiculously fast. Still, compared to Gu Nan, who was even more ridiculous, she was left far behind. Red did not immediately speak in response to Gu Nan's surprise. Instead, Girl No Return said, "We can give you whatever you want. Do you really have to attack the astral realm?" "I want human lives." Gu Nan shrugged nonchalantly. "If you're willing to provide, I'm more than happy to accept such cooperation." Red finally sneered. "You mean I'll painstakingly cultivate cultivators for you to kill?" "No." Gu Nan waved his hand and corrected her sternly. "It's you who nurtures the cultivators, and I'll kill my people. I don't mind them resisting." Red's gaze gradually turned cold. She looked at Gu Nan. "Then let's give it a try." Even if she was seriously injured and hadn't recovered, even if astral realm was inherited, even if he hadn't had the time to manage the astral realm for a long time, this was still his astral realm. Not just anyone could come and wreak havoc here. The last dignity of a realm-level Star Lord. Endless red began to descend, wrapping Gu Nan inside. It was as if his entire world had turned red. "Let's give it a try." Two calm words came from the red. div class equals other underscore links, txt download address. Phone reading. To make it easier to read next time, you can bookmark this time. Chapter 439 Chapter 4. Chapter 400. Red was not the kind of Star Lord that was good at attacking. Dragon? Altar? Book? Net? Her ability was related to blood and the color red, which was more suitable for large-scale battles. If she was commanding an army, she would be unimaginably useful. Unfortunately, she had to face personal attacks, and Gu Nan happened to be an expert in this field. The red color became denser and denser, almost wrapping Gu Nan into an eggshell. His figure could not be seen at all. The next moment, a loud sound came from inside the dark red eggshell, as if something had slammed into the wall of the eggshell. Even the space shook. When Wuguei saw that Gu Nan was easily wrapped up, he heaved a sigh of relief, but then he looked at Red in shock. "Go and help," Red said with difficulty. Beads of sweat had already begun to fall from her forehead. "Help who?" No Return asked quickly. She believed that the scene in front of her was not asking her to help fight against Gu Nan. Bang! 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 The sound from inside the eggshell became louder and louder. The two of them could almost see Gu Nan's fist slamming into the eggshell. Shadow Song. Red seemed to have used up all her strength to say this word. Bang! Accompanied by the sound of glass shattering, the dark red eggshell finally cracked open, and an unharmed Gu Nan walked out slowly. "Your power has declined too much." Gu Nan looked at Red calmly. He was not injured, but there was some red on his body. This meant that Red's control over her power was not even at the most basic level of concentration. In just a dozen years, Gu Nan had broken through 2 ranks consecutively, and his power had skyrocketed. Red, on the other hand, had regressed, and was not even comparable to before. More importantly, the astral world was a space-type dimension with a large gap, and the control of a Star Lord was far weaker than that of a normal astral world. The power that Red could borrow from the astral world was even weaker than some rank 6 Star Lord. She mostly relied on her own power to fight. "You had No Return save Shadow Song?" Gu Nan smiled. "Looks like your relationship isn't that simple." Shadow Song and Violet Lightning were actually still in the astral plane. At their level, they were nothing in Gu Nan's eyes. Green Hill. Teams of Dark Knights descended from the sky and began to charge from midair, their target the peak of the Green Hill. The skeletal warhorses that the knights rode on stomped their hooves in the air, causing the ground to tremble. The leader of the Dark Knights was also a knight, but he was dressed in bright red armor and stood out in the crowd. Rendongjian was one of the 9 members of the player army. His class path was the Blood Knight Captain. The Blood Knight Captain was neither good nor bad. It didn't have many heaven-defying abilities, but every ability was very practical. First of all, it had the Knight Commander's path, the ability to command and strengthen the Knight Army, and then the special law of blood. Vampiric resurrection, vampiric enhancement, vampiric tracking, and so on. It was more like the combination of the vampires and the undead. This time, he was leading the Dark Knights team, and their target was the gathering grounds of special cultivators like the Green Hill Mountain. "Who goes there?" As the first Dark Knight landed, a crisp shout rang out. There were already a few fox girls standing beneath him. All the divine envoys had descended at the first instant the invasion began, and these natives clearly didn't realize what was happening. Rendongjian sized up the fox girls beneath him coldly. The beautiful faces of the Green Hill tribe did not change the expression beneath his helmet. And if he didn't give the order, the Dark Knights would naturally carry out the original order. Charge! Continue the charge! The skeletal warhorses stepped into the air, and with every step they took, the knights would move faster, the force of their charge stronger, and the law they gathered would become more solid. That's right, these Dark Knights, who were usually only at level 3, could materialize laws due to their divine servants' characteristics. "Stop! How dare you invade the Green Hill Mountain, you!" Before one of the fox girls could finish shouting, Rendongjian's spear had already arrived, piercing through her head in an instant. Following closely behind him were the Dark Knights charging at top speed. They had no intention of slowing down, casually stabbing the enemies in front of them before stepping heavily over their corpses. The knights descended directly onto the peak of the Green Hill Mountain, then advanced toward the belly of the mountain. That was where the Fox tribe resided. The 6 Green Hill elders had already appeared, and they were all shocked by the sudden appearance of these enemies. But at that moment, a thin layer of fog gradually appeared, blocking the path of the Dark Knights. As soon as the knights entered the mist, their charge slowed down at a speed visible to the naked eye. No, it was not that their charge had been slowed down, but that there seemed to be an extremely long distance between them and the Green Hill Mountain. "Sir D1, it's all thanks to you being here this time." One of the Green Hill elders bowed, expressing her gratitude to a young man beside her. "It's nothing." D1 waved his hand and smiled. "With my relationship with Siener, how could I sit back and watch the Green Hill tribe suffer?" Beside him stood a beautiful young lady, her face flushed when she heard what D1 had said. "We don't know where these villains came from, but since they dared to run amok in the Central Star region, the Shanghai Pavilion will teach them a lesson." Another Green Hill elder said. The 3 words, Shanghai Pavilion, still had a powerful deterrent in the Star Realm, calming the hearts of the crowd. D1 laughed. "These fellows look powerful, but they are only extraordinary individuals. I'm afraid it won't be long before they run out of energy." A moment passed. Rendongjian was still leading the charge at the forefront of the knights, not relying on his own strength to advance quickly. D1's expression was a little stiff. Another moment passed, and they had already charged past more than half of the thin fog, but the Dark Knights showed no intention of slowing down. D1 began to unleash his full strength. The thin fog was once again stretched, but the knights accelerated even faster. "They're here." D1 could not delay any longer, and could only force himself to shout loudly, signaling for the people around him to take cover. But what he did not expect was that the moment he shouted, a blood-red figure had already taken the lead, reaching him in the blink of an eye. The Blood Knight leader, Rendongjian. Rendongjian gently thrust the blood-red spear in his hand forward, but it was like a ferocious beast had rammed into him. D1, who had been struck in the chest, instantly exploded into a cloud of blood mist. Following closely behind him were bolts of black hurricanes. D1's thin fog was like a perfect accelerator, increasing the speed of the Dark Knights to the maximum. The few Green Hill elders who had appeared did not even have the chance to let out a grunt, all of them perishing in the blink of an eye. Rendongjian lowered his head to look at the corpses on the ground, then led his warhorse and said, "Continue the charge. We have orders from the Lord to leave no one alive." On this day, the Green Hill Mountain flowed with blood, and similar scenes were happening all over the Star Realm. Div class equals other underscore links, download address, cell phone reading. To make it easier to read next time, you can bookmark this time. Chapter 440. Chapter 401. AD on the title begins. AD on the title Ench 1 text chapter 441 chapter FOUR charge. H1 A style equals color. Hashtag 00F. Ref equals iml. Next chapter /attablilager border equals 0 table border equals 0 align equals left trt table border equals 0 align equals left trt table border equals 0 align equals left trtd/tr/table bam. After another crisp sound, a layer of red shattered in front of Gu Nan, revealing Red's pale face. Just as Gu Nan had guessed at the beginning, Red's power at her peak was around level 8. It had declined after her injuries, and was now somewhere between level 7 and level 8. And after recuperating for so many years, when she had finally recovered, she was attacked from all sides. It was like rain after rain after rain. Now, her level was about the same as Gu Nan's, and her power was far from being a match for the body of the evil god. The astral world was too weak, and Red could not borrow too much power to kill Gu Nan in one blow. She could only let him whittle her down bit by bit. Gu Nan took a step forward, his fist already imprinted on Red's left shoulder. The latter reacted quickly, a smear of red blocking her shoulder, blocking the punch for a moment. But the terrifying force still passed through, causing Red's body to tremble slightly. The sound of bones cracking came from her shoulder. In the next moment, her figure disappeared, leaving only a red shadow where she had been standing. "Do you think you can escape?" Gu Nan let out a silent laugh, and quickly disappeared after her. On the green hill, the Dark Knights led by Rendongjian charged again and again. There was only the sound of hooves, cries, and curses, but not a single sound from the knights. They were like a bunch of ghosts. Their only purpose in existence was to kill, and nothing else. Just what are these things? At the peak of the green hill, Shadow Song knit her brows as she looked down. The existence of the Dark Knights made her feel strange. It's like some sort of ghost, like a 1,000-year-old zombie that has been awakened in a mass grave, Purplebolt said in an uncertain tone as he held the hilt of his sword with one hand. The two of them had only come to the green hill by chance, and did not expect to run into the invasion of the Dark Knights. "I'll give it a try." Shadow Song unsheathed a crimson scimitar from his waist. After all, these two people were not as shameless as Gu Nan. They could not do something like leaving the Green Hill clansmen behind. Even though they had learned from the mistakes of a few Qing Qiu elders, the two of them could be said to be skilled and bold. Not only did they not feel fear, they even analyzed the enemy's weakness. That idiot D1. He actually used spatial isolation to deal with the ghosts. He made them accelerate to the limit for no reason, Shadow Song sneered. Purplebolt nodded and said, "Those black-armored knights are only at the transcendent realm. We'll cut in from the flank." "All right." As soon as he finished speaking, both of them disappeared at the same time. Their many years of cooperation had given them great synergy. They appeared at the same time on the left of the Dark Knights, each choosing a knight as their target. Shadow Song's scimitar and Purplebolt's longsword hit their targets at the same time. Of the two knights, one had his body sliced in half, while the other had his throat pierced. "They are indeed at the transcendent realm." A look of surprise appeared on Shadow Song's face. She had a feeling that these monsters were not as simple as they seemed. "Careful!" Purplebolt's warning came from beside her ear. Shadow Song shifted her body to the side without thinking, then saw that the leading blood-red knight was thrusting his spear at the spot where she had been standing. This was a world breaker. Shadow Song had not finished that thought when she suddenly felt something tighten behind her, as if she had been tightly bound by steel. Rendongjan's long spear was thrusting straight at her face. She could not help but turn her head in shock, only to see the dark knight that she had cut off half of his body hugging her tightly with his remaining arm. Clang! Rendongjan's long spear had not landed when it was accurately deflected by Purple Bolt. He then sliced off the Dark Knight's arm with one slash, then grabbed Shadow Song's arm and retreated in a hurry. Rendongjan looked at the two coldly, but did not give the order to pursue. It was not a problem for the Dark Knights to chase after two level 4 experts in terms of speed, but they would definitely keep changing directions, making it very difficult to catch up. Before he had been taken in as a divine envoy by Gunan, he had been a renowned general on the battlefield. Of course he would not make such a mistake. As Purple Bolt and Rendongjan retreated all the way to the peak of the mountain, Shadow Song said with lingering fear, "Even a general zombie cannot move freely without a head. I'm afraid those are not living creatures." Purple Bolt's expression was slightly dark. He had not expected Shadow Song to nearly be injured in their first exchange of blows. He thought for a moment, then said, "Let's go back and meet that person first and see what has happened?" At their level, the major events of the universe were too far away from them. They did not pay much attention to them on a daily basis, so it was natural that they could not guess what had happened. Shadow Song clenched her teeth, thinking carefully for a moment, then said in a low voice, "Let's try again." Rendongjan. A voice came from behind, causing the leader of the Blood Knights to frown and turn to look. The figure of Redtail was slowly walking over, holding the hand of a little girl from the Green Hill tribe. The little girl looked unkempt, and she quickly shrank back when she saw the Dark Knight. Redtail patted her head lightly, telling her not to be afraid, then spoke slowly. "The Lord has ordered us to leave the children of the Green Hill tribe behind." Rendongjan's gaze turned serious, and he said in a low voice, "The order I received was to kill them all." As he spoke, he lowered his head slightly to look at the little girl, his cold gaze causing the latter to tremble slightly, almost crying out loud. "Now the order has been changed." Redtail's voice suddenly rose. She was the overall commander of this operation, and even Rendongjan's team had been sent out under her orders. But Rendongjan only let out a cold smile, not even looking at Redtail as he mounted his horse. "Charge!" As his order fell, the Dark Knights once again charged upwards. They had already bathed the Green Hill in blood, and were about to return to the peak of the mountain. Rendongjan did not look back even after the figures of the Dark Knights had disappeared. Redtail's expression was dark as she crushed a rune in her hand, passing the order to the other divine envoys. They were the subordinates she had recruited in the White Fog. "Bring the men to the Green Hill immediately." Just as Redtail gave the order, a beam of red light suddenly lit up at the peak of the Green Hill. It was Shadow Song's scimitar appearing once again, this time headed straight for Rendongjan. Shadow Song and Redtail had realized that it was not realistic to gradually whittle away at their opponent. They might as well take out the leader first. At the same time the scimitar appeared, purple sword light also surrounded Rendongjan, separating him from the surrounding Dark Knights. The two of them had a clear division of labor, and they were certain that Rendongjan was not as powerful as Shadow Song. Even a single exchange would be enough to severely injure him. But they did not expect the response of the leader of the Blood Knights. "Charge! Charge!" Chapter 402. 92 ZW. The army bore down on Shadow Song and Violet Lightning with unparalleled might, sending them crashing into the ground. The blood scimitar and the longsword called Purple Lightning easily hit Rendongjan, but the latter's face was like stone. He did not show any expression. With the buffs of the Blood Knight leader, the Dark Knights who were in charge displayed an unimaginably powerful force. After more than a dozen consecutive collisions, Purple Bolt coughed up blood. He had no choice but to hastily break away from the battle formation. Only then did he look down in shock. It was important to know that his sword light was not an ordinary sword dance. It had the super rules of a break world elite, but it was broken by a group of transcendent. When Shadow Song pulled back her scimitar from Rin Dongzhan's body, the scary army was in front of her. After all, she was a top break world elite. At this critical moment, her body went soft. Her entire body turned into blood and scattered everywhere. She was a break world elite. This was her trump card to save her life. As long as the blood was not completely destroyed, she could be reborn. Unfortunately, the enemy Shadow Song encountered this time was a Blood Knight captain. Seeing his opponent turn into a pool of blood, Ren Dongzhan tugged on the reins forcefully, and the Dark Knights behind him also stopped, not taking another step forward. The scene looked very strange. All the knights suddenly stopped. It was like inertia did not exist. Ren Dongzhan stabbed his long spear into the ground. The blood armor on his chest glowed. The strange symbols on it lit up. Attracted by the blood light on the armor, all the blood around started to rise. It gathered in Ren Dongzhan's direction. Even Red Tail felt a suction force. It was like all the blood in his body was being sucked out. Shadow Song, who was the first to be affected, was even more so. No! Purple Lightning seemed to understand something. He kept screaming. His whole body went crazy as he ran toward Ren Dongzhan. Ren Dongzhan's face was expressionless. He suddenly felt something. He looked up at the sky with confusion. At the limit of the sky, it was like a palm print of gold and purple was falling. In the depths of the starry sky, in the Red Palace, guards appeared from the void one after another. They thrust their blades at Gu Nan, but they disappeared in an instant. Interesting guards, but they can only delay your defeat and death. In the face of such an attack that was impossible to defend against, Gu Nan's expression didn't even change when his abdomen was stabbed. The true strength of Red was that she could strengthen her subordinate. This was the greatest use of her astral power. That was why she had 1,000 guards in her palace. Unfortunately, they were betrayed by Qian Han and killed. But now, she changed her way of thinking and turned all the guards into invisible servants. With the support of the red screen, their offensive and defensive abilities were greatly enhanced, and they became the most terrifying assassins. She had to admit that this method was much more effective against Zhuo Zhuo than it was in the past. But now, she had to deal with Gu Nan. Pucci. Another knife was stabbed into Gu Nan's right abdomen. This time, Gu Nan finally seized the opportunity. He suddenly stretched out his right hand and punched in front of him. As a result, a cloud of blood suddenly exploded in front of him, and half of a corpse emerged from the void. It was the guard's body that had been blown up. At the same time, the wounds on his body healed rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, it was as if he had never been injured at all. Normally, when a Star Lord invaded, it was important to finish the battle quickly because they couldn't fight a war of attrition in someone else's territory. That would be suicide. But Gu Nan relied on himself to fight, and he could instead choose to delay the opponent and let the divine servants attack the city. That was his goal in the first place. But this time, Red was very calm. I've prepared 3,000 guards for you. You can play slowly. I hope your subordinates can last through no return sweep. What Gu Nan didn't expect was that Red's intention was the same as his. As long as she could delay Gu Nan, the strongest fighter, the young girl No Return could completely deal with the others. Gu Nan's movements suddenly paused, which caused him to take another 2 stabs, but he didn't care. Thanks for the reminder. He nodded at the deepest part of the palace, and then forcefully opened a spatial passage against the countless guards' attempts to assassinate him, and slowly walked in. On the green hill, No Return's palm landed, instantly slamming Ren Dongzhan into the ground, and the extraction of blood naturally stopped. The blood belonging to Shadow Song took the opportunity to escape, and manifested beside her. She was panting heavily, her face full of shock. She had not expected the other party to be so decisive. If she were given a chance to choose again, she wouldn't go up no matter what. Are you all right? No Return's gaze paused on Shadow Song for a moment. Shadow Song gently shook her head, sheathing the scimitar at her waist. I'm fine. He's still alive. As Shadow Song's voice fell, Rendongjian was still smashed into a pile of meat paste on the ground, but a few drops of blood were gathering at the center. The next moment, the blood suddenly swelled, and turned into the figure of Rendongjian. He quickly got onto his horse. Hold on! A voice interrupted. It was Red Tail, who had rushed over. She gave Rendongjian a look, signaling for him to retreat for the time being. Red Tail was someone from the astral world, and knew the identity of the person before her. She was not someone the Dark Knights could fight against. Buddha No Return. She then looked at No Return. This time, the Lord is attacking the astral world with all his might. This world is on the brink of destruction. Why are you getting involved in this mess? But what kind of person was No Return? He had never paid any attention to a mere mortal. He let out a cold laugh. It's not your place to lecture me. Red Tail clenched her teeth. She was about to say something when a sound came from behind her. Charge! Are you crazy? Red Tail could not help but turn back to curse. But what she saw was the figures of the Dark Knights, not a single one retreating. She turned back again, and saw the figure of Rendongjian charging forward without hesitation, even though he could not withstand a single blow from No Return. The cold smile on No Return's face deepened. He casually struck out with his palm. The Buddhist and demonic wills intertwined, instantly expanding into a giant handprint, directly wiping out most of the Dark Knight. But even so, Rendongjian was resurrected once again. He led the remaining Dark Knights and sped toward No Return. But anyone could see that Rendongjian's power was starting to weaken. Clearly, this resurrection was not without a price. Why? Red Tail was speechless. She could not understand such a suicidal action. Not bad. At that moment, she heard a voice of praise beside her ear. She quickly turned her head and saw that Gu Nan was already standing there. Chapter 403. Starting from ad on the title. Ending from ad on the title 1 Chapter 443. Unexpected setbacks /H1A style equals color. Hashtag 00F. Ref equals 5772699. HTML. Next chapter /addableelager border equals 0 table border equals 0 align equals left table border equals 0 align equals left table border equals 0 align equals left trtd/tr/table to the current Gu Nan. The points needed to create the Dark Knights were nothing to him. The Divine Kingdom War was a game that required a lot of investment and a lot of returns. The most difficult part was undoubtedly the initial accumulation of points. By the time the players had successfully built an army and successfully conquered a dimension, the points they would earn would usually be more than what they had invested. At the first transition stage, the players were not afraid of not knowing how to earn money, but they were afraid of not knowing how to spend money. Newbies would often make the mistake of being reluctant to spend points, which would instead lower their efficiency. Hence, Gu Nan was rather impressed with Rendongjian's actions. Even if his actions were just throwing his life away, he could become a role model for others. After all, after obtaining Macefield's crystal ball, reviving mortals was no longer difficult. As subordinates, they only needed to carry out the orders meticulously. Weighing the gains and losses was not something they should be doing, especially when Gu Nan himself did not care about the losses. Regardless of what Gu Nan's war policies were, his arrival was the thing that could affect the outcome of the war the most. The young lady, No Return, immediately sensed that something was amiss. She did not even have the intention to meet Gu Nan face to face, casually slapping Rendongjian down. Her other hand had already gently swept Shadow Song and Purple Lightning into the Kasaya. However, just as she was about to turn and retreat, she felt her vision blur. Gu Nan had unknowingly appeared in front of her. No Return pushed out her palm without hesitation. Boundless Buddhist chants instantly enveloped the surroundings, causing Gu Nan to feel as though he was within the 3,000 Buddhist lands. Back then, no return had to make ample preparations for the Buddhist lands. Now, however, she was able to casually create one. It was clear that she had improved greatly. Unfortunately, Gu Nan had changed even more. With his current realm, he could easily take on No Return's attack. Gu Nan's fist landed on No Gui's palm, and in that instant, all the Buddhist chants disappeared. All the Buddhas collapsed, and No Gui was sent flying. Okay, you guys continue. Gu Nan turned around and looked down. Then, he disappeared and returned to the depths of the sea of stars. In the blink of an eye, Gu Nan had gone back and forth between the Cosmic Palace and Green Hill. After heavily injuring No Gui, he stood before Red again. According to his estimation, even if Wu Gui didn't die on the spot after taking his punch, he wouldn't have much fighting strength left. Even if he could still attack, the most he could do was throw another punch. Red's face was ashen. More and more ghost guards gathered, almost surrounding Gu Nan. She had learned her lesson, and she didn't want to make the same mistake again. To Red, her initial plan was to lure Gu Nan here, and make use of her home ground advantage to unleash her power to the fullest in order to hold him back. Other than that, her words and actions were just a psychological attack. But she didn't expect Gu Nan to be this tough. He could withstand the attack of the Blood Guards and escape from her palace. As far as Gu Nan was concerned, this was truly nothing great, and it was none other than a battle of tactics between both sides. Red wanted to use her advantage, and use army tactics to delay him. Of course, he could do the opposite and use his army's heavy and clumsy weakness to counterattack. Now that things had come to this, Red didn't have many trump cards she could use. She was a Star Lord who didn't have many friends. All these years, she didn't even have time to take care of the astral world. She spent all her time recuperating. If this continued, Red could only watch as the astral world was invaded and destroyed by Gu Nan's God's servant army. And that was what the God's servants did. Under the leadership of their respective God's envoys, they attacked the 9 major starfields at the same time. The flames of war instantly spread across the entire astral world. And Gu Nan could also use this opportunity to obtain a large number of points. According to his previous calculations, he might be able to accumulate enough points to advance to the 8th order this time. After all, although the astral world was weak internally, it was mainly because of the characteristics of the starry sky astral world. It made it difficult to gather high-end forces, and the total value of points was not low. But reality was always not as good as the script. Just as Gu Nan stayed in the Starry Palace and dealt with the attacks of the Ghost Guards, his and Red's expressions changed at the same time. So you have helpers? Gu Nan looked at Red with a smile that wasn't a smile. He sensed that a Star Lord had descended from the heavens and went directly to one of the starfields to attack Gu Nan's God's servant army. But this Star Lord wasn't strong. It seemed that he had barely reached the 6th order. It was likely that he hadn't even chosen his astral world yet. Red's face didn't have a look of understanding. Instead, she also had some doubts, but this expression only flashed for a moment. She knew very well that the most important thing at this time was not to be seen through by Gu Nan. Gu Nan didn't think too much and disappeared again. This time, the Ghost Guards couldn't even stop him. Obviously, he was already familiar with their attacks. Gu Nan's figure instantly appeared in front of the Star Lord. Without saying a word, he smashed his fist down. The terrifying power instantly made the Star Lord's expression change. At this moment, an inexplicable sense of danger rose in Gu Nan's heart. It was as if there was a prick on his back, causing him to subconsciously turn around and withdraw his fist. The warning from the body of the evil god was indeed not an illusion. At the same time that Gu Nan retreated and left, a dignified and solemn kill character appeared out of thin air, and it pressed down on the spot he was originally at. An old man with white hair and beard slowly appeared. There was no expression on his face, but his eyes were fixed on Gu Nan. Fong Chaoyun. When Gu Nan saw the person who appeared, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. This person was the one who was injured by Gu Nan previously, Fong Chaoyun, old Mr. Fong. He was Song Fei's disciple and also a rank 10 great Star Lord. Even in the myriad worlds, he was considered a big shot. Gu Nan couldn't help but laugh. He didn't expect that with this person's identity, he would purposely come to find trouble with him. However, Fong Chaoyun's next words made Gu Nan realize that he wasn't just here to find trouble with him, but also to find trouble with him. Gu Nan. Fong Chaoyun slowly walked up and said in a low voice, "The Star Lord of the Stellar World has no enmity with you. Why do you want to invade this world? What does it have to do with you?" Gu Nan replied bluntly. However, Fong Chaoyun sneered, "Endless war will bring misery to the people. This Fong only worships the word Confucian in my life. I want to take the safety of the people as my responsibility. How can I sit back and watch you do whatever you want?" These genteel words gave Gu Nan a headache, but the meaning was clear. In the end, if you, Gu Nan, want to invade other astral worlds in the future, you have to ask me, Old Fong, first. Chapter 404. AD on the title begins. AD on the title Ench 1 Text Chapter 444 Antro du Cito and the man behind the Sinisa style equals color. Hashtag 00F. Ref equals iml. Next chapter /atablilager border equals 0 table border equals 0 align equals left trt table border equals 0 align equals left trt table border equals 0 align equals left trtd/tr/table. Gu Nan scratched his head. Sooner or later, the invasion would cause a collective boycott. This was unavoidable. It was impossible for the Star Lords to not understand the logic of without the lips, the teeth will feel the cold, and when the rabbit dies, the fox grieve. However, it was troublesome for Fong Chaoyun to raise the flag of righteousness and go against him. This old man had strength, connections, and backing. He was indeed invulnerable. There was almost no weakness to be found. However, this was not the first time that Gu Nan had encountered a difficult mission. He would not back down. Without a word, he threw a punch at Fong Chaoyun. A familiar, suppress, character appeared and easily blocked Gu Nan's path. Weaker than last time, but not by much. Gu Nan was not in a hurry to attack. Instead, he analyzed the enemy's situation. With Fong Chaoyun's injuries last time, he would need at least 100 years to recover. However, although he was still injured, he did not have much left. This could only be attributed to Song Fei. What Gu Nan did not expect was that in the blink of an eye, nearly 10 Star Lords appeared at the same time. They entered the astral world from different directions, targeting the god's servants who were in the middle of a massacre. Gu Nan frowned slightly. He gave up on the idea of killing the enemy and decisively gave an order from the god's kingdom. "Everyone, retreat. Retreat as much as you can." The voice sounded in the minds of all the god's servants. The army of god's servants who entered the astral world immediately changed formation and fled to the god's kingdom. Of course, with the intervention of the Star Lords, losses were unavoidable. For most of the divine servants below the 4th rank, the Star Lord's level was still a bit too high. The divine servants had absolute obedience, and there was no such thing as a distance when they traveled through space, so their retreat speed was extremely fast. Fong Chaoyun's spirit was also scanning the entire interstellar realm. Seeing that Gu Nan's troops were retreating, he did not go forward to stop them. Instead, he only spoke after making sure that he was prepared. "It's not too late to correct your mistakes." Fong Chaoyun stroked his beard and smiled. "I hope that you will restrain yourself after this. Otherwise, this old man will not mind punishing you again." After saying this, he actually didn't care about what Gu Nan did and turned around to return to his own astral boundary. This was probably the harsh words of a cultured person. At the same time that Fong Chaoyun disappeared, The other Star Lords also disappeared in the blink of an eye, as if they were afraid of being caught by Gu Nan. Interesting. Gu Nan revealed a strange smile. You messed up this time. Sure, Jitian. Lu Wen sat in front of Duan Wenqi, speaking rudely. Duan Wenqi didn't get angry. He knew that many times, he couldn't see things as clearly as this old friend of his, and didn't mind listening to his opinion. Lu Wen didn't even give Duan Wenqi a chance to speak, directly speaking. You incited those two idiots to cause trouble for Gu Nan. That's nothing much, it's just a small matter. But you collaborated with Feng Chaoyun, sigh. Towards the end, Lu Wen could not help but sigh deeply. Everyone is avoiding Zi Luo and Song Fei's fight as much as they can. Why did you have to interfere? That's right, the reason why Feng Chaoyun would act against Gu Nan, and even find over 10 Star-Lords to help him, was largely due to Duan Wenqi's efforts. He was the first to suggest that Gu Nan was acting recklessly, and then received Feng Chaoyun's approval. He was also the one who personally contacted the Star-Lords of Shi Daotian's faction, using Feng Chaoyun's name to deal with Gu Nan together. It could be said that after this matter, Duan Wenqi had already completely stood on Song Fei's side. Duan Wenqi's status and strength weren't low, so Lu Wen couldn't understand why he was in such a hurry to pick a side. Facing Lu Wen's question, Duan Wenqi only smiled. As long as you choose the right side, you will be able to obtain more than helping neither side, isn't that so? Lu Wen frowned slightly, but ultimately didn't try to persuade him any further, only sighing helplessly. Within the Divine Kingdom, Gu Nan was already seated in the evil Divine Palace, waiting for the results to be tallied. How are our losses? We've lost over 80% of the Divine Servants, and 10 of the Divine Envoys have died, all of them at the hands of the Star-Lords. Red Tail's expression was very grave, and even somewhat gloomy. She couldn't see the existence of the points, but she was very clear that for this batch of Divine Servants, Gu Nan had spent a lot of time preparing. She didn't think that more than half of it would be lost in the blink of an eye. The power of over 10 Star-Lords attacking at the same time was still a little too strong. They seemed to have all come to kill the army, not showing any mercy, and not to protect the stellar realm at all. The Divine Envoys were fine, though their losses were not small, at least no important figures had died. It was also because of this setback that she, who had originally planned to teach Ren Dongzhan a lesson, was no longer in the mood. Gu Nan only nodded lightly, not as nervous as Red Tail. The first batch of Divine Servants had been produced slowly, largely because they had to build and upgrade the buildings, and the points spent to produce Divine Servants were not many. On the other hand, though the invasion this time couldn't be considered successful, the rewards were not bad. Only around 70% of the stellar realm had been taken down, but the points obtained were considerable. He wasn't far from reaching the 8th level, and could completely make up for it by farming. At most, it would take a few months. But on the other hand, if he could take down the stellar realm in one fell swoop, Gu Nan's points would instantly explode, and the losses caused by Feng Chaoyun and the others would still be very large. Teacher, the Heavenly Deity Association has sent a secret letter. At this time, Yan Xiaoxiao's figure appeared. Gu Nan nodded as he received the secret letter, not finding it strange at all. Feng Chaoyun had targeted him, and even he himself did not believe that Song Fei and Elder Zi Luo were not behind it. Under such circumstances, the Heavenly Deity Association would definitely react. As he expected, the secret letter explained the cause of the matter in detail, with the main point being the reason why more than 10 Celestial Lords had attacked at the same time. At the end of the secret letter, there was no mention of how they would deal with this matter, and instead, they invited him to the Xianqing world for a chat. It was signed by the new Xianqing world lord, Taoist Zhuang Xian. Duan Wenqi. Gu Nan muttered the name softly. In his memories, the conflict between him and this elder of the astral realm was not very deep. He did not expect that this side quest that he did not have time to deal with would lead to an even bigger side quest. No matter what, the 10th level Fong Chaoyun was not someone he could deal with at the moment. Gu Nan's plan was to wait for his points to accumulate, then head to the world of gods to harvest sin points and advance to the 8th level. When it was time to retreat, it was not advisable to act recklessly. Once he was at the 8th level, he would no longer be afraid of Fong Chaoyun in a head-on fight, and it was not as if he had no way to deal with this group of people. He also needed to make a trip to the Xianqing world to see how the Heavenly Deity Association's internal department would react. In essence, this matter was still a fight between Elder Zi Luo and Song Fei. But before that, Duan Wenqi. Gu Nan once again called out this name. A cold smile hung on his face, as a sparkling and translucent pearl appeared in his hand. Do you think that Lu Wen can protect you? Chapter 405. Add on the title began. Add on the title in Dead 1 Chapter 445 Chapter FOUR Origin /H1A Style equals Color Hashtag 00F Ref equals 5775488 HTML Next Chapter /Attablilager border equals 0 Table border equals 0 Align equals left Table border equals 0 Align equals left Table border equals 0 Align equals left TRTD/TR/Table Duan Wenqi left Shiji Tian and subconsciously wanted to go to Ziluo Heaven, but then he stopped in his track. After sighing softly, he turned and went to another astral world. That was his own astral world, Yao Luoshi. Speaking of which, Duan Wenqi had not been here for a long time. For an astral lord, this was really an incredible thing. The astral world was the foundation of an astral lord, and also the cornerstone of an astral lord's power. Even if he thought that his astral world was not good in all aspects, he could just change to another astral world. There was really no need to make things difficult for himself. When Gu Nan first met Duan Wenqi, he felt that Duan Wenqi's power was about the same as Red's. In fact, he was not wrong. In terms of personal cultivation, Duan Wenqi was not the slightest bit weaker than Red, but his astral world was still world level. No matter how weak the astral world was, it was still a real world level plane. The two were not on the same level. The slow development of Yao Luoshi also had a lot to do with Duan Wenqi investing a lot of time in the astral world gate. Yao Luoshi was a typical savage plane. The level of civilization here stopped at a very backward level, very similar to the legendary ancient times of many planes. And the origin of the name Yao Luoshi was because this place was filled with a large number of demon race. Demons of all shapes and sizes roamed freely in this vast desolate land, carrying out the most primitive hunting and survival. Returning to his own astral world, Duan Wenqi finally relaxed. As if venting his anger, he slapped down with his palm, directly cutting the mountain in front of him in half. It was clear how angry he was. Damn Ziluo! Duan Wenqi's eyes were red, blue veins popped on his forehead, and he was panting heavily. He could not calm down for a long time. It was very rare for a Star Lord to lose his composure like this. Lu Wen found it hard to understand why Duan Wenqi was intentionally targeting Gu Nan. This was only natural, as Duan Wenqi basically wasn't targeting Gu Nan, but old man Zi Luo. From the very beginning, Duan Wenqi had to stand on Song Fei's side. Did he need a reason to target Gu Nan? For the sake of the astral gate, he, Duan Wenqi, had painstakingly built it for tens of thousands of years. He couldn't even take care of his own astral boundary. Now, in just one night, it had become someone else's wedding dress. How could he not be angry? After old man Zi Luo returned to the All Heavens, the first thing he did was let the Heavenly Deity Society settle in Purple Civ Heaven. The second thing he did was incorporate all the organizations in Purple Civ Heaven. Regardless of the size of these organizations, they had to submit to the Heaven God Assembly and become its peripheral organizations. Otherwise, they would be expelled from the Violet Civ Heaven. This kind of behavior was extremely overbearing, but the major organizations had no choice but to accept it. On one hand, the other party was a Tao integration expert and the true master of Purple Sieve Heaven, so they were powerless to resist. On the other hand, after so many years of operation, everyone's foundation was in Purple Sieve Heaven, so they couldn't move elsewhere. Many people didn't understand Old Man Zi Luo's motive for doing this, but Duan Wenqi knew very well that Purple Sieve Heaven's origin law was organization. Every Star Lord had their own laws, and the existence of these laws would inevitably affect the astral boundary. Just like how cultivating in Supreme Sword Heaven was much easier, and opening an academy in Master Path Heaven allowed both teachers and students to benefit, the astral boundary's core law was something that truly existed. And Purple Sieve Heaven's core law was organization, so when Old Man Zi Luo disappeared, this place became the best place for all the major organizations to develop. It was also because of the special law of organization that there was some overlap with Song Fei's Master Path. Both of them needed to nurture their descendants in order to help their own cultivation progress. That was why Old Man Zi Luo had blocked Song Fei's path back then. It was also because of this that Old Man Zi Luo had spent so much effort to run the Heavenly Deity Society and had spared no effort to help Lorenza, Schwerin, and the others reach the Tao. To him, helping others was the same as helping himself. However, this was especially unacceptable to Duan Wenqi, because his law was also organization. He had managed the Astral Gate for so many years, and had even secretly taken in a few small organizations. His power in Purple Sieve Heaven had already expanded to a terrifying degree. If he was given another few thousand years, he might really be able to take over the entire Purple Sieve Heaven through peaceful means. Representative. A voice rang out beside Duan Wenqi. It was a young man dressed in blue. This person was called Fong Tun, and he used to be Duan Wenqi's trusted aide in the Astral Gate. Under Duan Wenqi's orders, the Astral Gate was one of the few organizations that had resolutely refused to be taken in and moved into the demon Civ world. Fortunately, the Astral Gate's main business was reincarnation. Otherwise, the losses would be unbearable. Hearing this familiar name, Duan Wenqi slowly calmed down and nodded. "How's the transfer of members going?" Fong Tun smiled bitterly. "Everything else is fine, but all reincarnation work has been stopped. This isn't a world plane yet. If it wasn't a celestial plane or a world plane, they naturally couldn't be reincarnated into other planes." Duan Wenqi was stunned. After living in Purple Sieve Heaven for so many years, he had almost forgotten this rule. If everything went smoothly, he wouldn't have to consider this at all. However, his hatred for the old man Purple Sieve increased. Duan Wenqi could only say, "Arrange for them to be reincarnated in Time Memory Heaven for now. I'll think of something." Fortunately, he had a good friend like Lu Wen, so he didn't have to worry too much. However, Duan Wenqi didn't expect that the greatest calamity of his life since becoming a Star Lord would soon arrive. "Who are you?" In the Divine Kingdom, Gu Nan looked at the lanky Taoist priest standing in front of him and asked in confusion. "This humble Taoist priest is Zhuang Xian. Please follow this humble Taoist priest to the profound clarity world." The Taoist priest cupped his hands in greeting and replied in an emotionless voice. Gu Nan recalled that this was the person who had written him the secret letter. Since Taoist Spirit Son had stayed in the world of gods, someone naturally had to inherit the profound clarity world. However, the succession had been too quick, even taking over the affairs of the Heavenly God Society. There was only one possibility: Taoist Spirit Son had wanted to leave long ago. The old Taoist priest's face appeared in Gu Nan's mind. He had arranged everything long ago. Taoist Spirit Son is, yes, your master. Who would have thought that Taoist Spirit Son, who looked so normal, would have such a strict disciple? Gu Nan nodded and didn't mind. He put away the Divine Kingdom pearl in his hand and said casually, "I'm going out for a while. I'll go to the profound clarity world after I'm done." With that, he turned to leave. However, Zhuang Xian frowned slightly and blocked his way. "Hold on, master. You might not understand what happened. This time, it wasn't just your event that was targeted. Senior Shui and Senior Crazy Fist were also attacked." Chapter 406. The title began with ad. The title ended with ADH1 text. Chapter 446/H1 A style equals color. #00F. Ref equals iml. Next chapter /addableelager border equals 0 table border equals 0 align equals left trt table border equals 0 align equals left trt table border equals 0 align equals left trtd/tr/table. When Gu Nan arrived at the Xianqing world, the core members of the Heavenly Gods Association were Serene, Crazy Fist, and the Grand Sage Immortal Empress of the Magnificent Heaven. The Grand Sage Immortal Empress hadn't gone when Elder Zi Luo had brought people to the world of gods. Now she was here. This time, she wasn't afraid of being exposed. The reason was simple. Her left hand was wrapped in white gauze. "Looks like a lot of people have been attacked." Gu Nan looked around. Schwerin and Crazy Fist didn't look too good either. Clearly, this was a meeting of the people who had been attacked, and the situation was quite serious. Schwerin only had 10 years, but even he had time to come out. This was a critical moment. The old man was also attacked, Schwerin said solemnly when he saw Gu Nan arrive. He then pointed upwards. This time, Gu Nan was really surprised. He hadn't expected Elder Zi Luo to be so powerful when he returned to the world of gods. "Song Fei. If only it were him. Is Jiupe." Schwerin's voice sounded very low. Compared to Song Fei of the Sherdao Heaven, Jiupe Starlord was the real tough nut to crack. This Starlord was also one of the oldest Dao fusing cultivators. Back then, he had helped Song Fei beat Elder Zi Luo into the dust. Moreover, Song Fei didn't do things in the open, but at least he did things in the open. Jiupe was different. Even when he had secretly attacked Elder Zi Luo, only the two people involved knew about it. The world of gods had not received any news at all. In a sense, this was a venomous snake hiding in the dark, opening its mouth to bite the most fatal spot. What followed was an exchange of information. Gu Nan's invasion of other astral realms was obstructed, Crazy Fist was besieged when he was challenging others, and Schwerin's extreme sword Heaven's internal situation was unstable, where the traditional sword Dao and the new sword Dao were in conflict again. The most bizarre thing was the Grand Sage Immortal Empress. Inside her magnificent heaven, a pile of dragon chi suddenly appeared, and it was completely out of her control. To a star realm like the magnificent Imperial Heaven, this phenomenon meant the rise of a new celestial empire. The Grand Sage Immortal Empress, who also used draconic chi as her foundation, was practically unable to stop it. The four of them had encountered different obstacles at the same time, and old man Zi Luo had been ambushed by Jiupe Tian himself. It was clear that the enemy had come with ill intentions. At that moment, Taoist Zhuang Xian suddenly coughed and said, "Everyone, the situation may be more complicated than you think." The Grand Sage Immortal Empress raised her brows. Even though she had only said one word, the dissatisfaction in her voice was still audible. She was displeased that Taoist Zhuang Xian had interjected without permission. This was because she did not have a good impression of this junior from the very beginning. In the Heavenly God Society, Taoist Spirit Yang had played the role of a steward, and he had always been the one to handle the daily affairs. Since Taoist Spirit Yang had stayed in the world of gods, the position here had naturally been vacated by someone else. Schwerin was busy advancing, and in terms of seniority, the Grand Sage Immortal Empress was undoubtedly the most qualified. Unfortunately, before she could take the position, Taoist Spirit Yang had actually gained another disciple. Zhuang Xian did not mind and continued. The attacks on the four seniors and Senior Zi Luo seem to have been done by the same person, but Senior Schwerin's situation is slightly different. He paused for a moment, not giving the Grand Sage Immortal Empress a chance to speak again, and then continued, "I've seen the cause and effect of this matter. Other things can be done on the spur of the moment, but the battle of the way of the sword cannot." Schwerin was slightly taken aback, but then he nodded and said, "That's right. This time, it was my two martial uncles who stood out. They are both figures who have been in seclusion for thousands of years, and they have made ample preparations. The battle of orthodoxies could only be handled by people from within the extreme sword heaven, and the operations and preparations were very troublesome. It was far from being settled in a short period of time." The Grand Sage Immortal Empress frowned and looked at Zhuang Xian. "What exactly are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that there might be two groups of people acting in secret." Zhuang Xian's young face was still calm, without the slightest fluctuation, but his words were enough to astonish everyone. Schwerin's eyes narrowed slightly. "One group did act on the spur of the moment, using various methods to attack us. As for the other group, they have been planning this for a long time, specifically targeting me?" "That's right." Zhuang Xian finally nodded. "So I believe that our current strategy should be to pull back our battle lines and do our best not to give the first group a chance." No one present was stupid. After Zhuang Xian pointed out the main point, the following strategy seemed logical. Temporary actions could be dealt with by avoiding battle, but Schwerin was currently the Heavenly Deity Society's top priority, so they should gather their resources to help him solve the problem. Crazy Fist immediately expressed, "I understand. I'll stay in the Star Realm during this period of time. It's none of my business if others come knocking on our door." Zhuang Xian replied, "If someone comes knocking on our door, please do not hold back, Senior Crazy Fist." The Grand Sage Immortal Empress's expression was somewhat strange. She had also thought through the cause and effect, but she felt that it was strange to have to rely on a junior's advice. Even Lu Wen would have times where he couldn't see through the situation, needless to say them. However, she also knew that this was not the time to be impulsive. Zhuang Xian's suggestion was indeed good. "I'll deal with the Dragon Qi in the Star Realm myself." The Grand Sage Immortal Empress looked at Schwerin and said, "If you need my help, just say it." This Immortal Empress was able to seize the throne from a group of princes and princesses, but her personality was even more heroic than that of a man. However, Zhuang Xian said, "Cleaning up the Dragon Qi is not difficult. I hope that Senior Grand Sage can focus on treating the symptoms and not the root of the problem for now." Simply put, he wanted to maintain the status quo. When the Grand Sage Immortal Empress nodded in agreement, Zhuang Xian looked at Gu Nan and said, "Senior Gu Nan's matter is the easiest to deal with. As long as we stop the invasion and guard the Star Realm Gate, there's no need to fear Feng Chaoyun and the others." Zhuang Xian continued to speak, actually describing the possible actions of the enemy, as well as the countermeasures they should take. He explained everything, no matter how big or small. It was only at this moment that this somewhat wooden-looking young man's eyes shone with a strange light, as if he was born to do this. When he finished speaking, the entire place fell silent. What needed to be said had already been said by Zhuang Xian. Schwerin glanced around without anyone noticing, taking in everyone's reactions. This successor of Taoist Spirit Yang had naturally asked him to take care of him, and today was also the stage he had designed for Zhuang Xian. As long as he won the approval of these people and his own support, Zhuang Xian could be considered to have completely stabilized his position. From their reactions, the effect was still. "Wait a moment." His gaze fell on Gu Nan. The latter's expression seemed to be somewhat different from what he had imagined. "Are you done?" Gu Nan had an expression as if he had skipped over the plot. "I should go find Duan Wenqi and have a chat." "Senior Gu Nan," Zhuang Xian frowned and stood up. "You don't have any reason." Chapter 407. 92 ZW Gu Nan didn't even pay attention to what Zhuang Xian said. After all, apart from his initial analysis, he had also added a whole bunch of reasons. Players just happened to be impatient. It was enough for players to understand the NPC's general attitude. The rest of the dialogue could be skipped. Gu Nan didn't have any objections to Zhuang Xian's temporary suspension of the Divine Kingdom War. In any case, with Fang Chaoyun going against him, it wasn't likely that he would achieve anything and waste the divine servants. If he wanted to restart the Divine Kingdom War again, he would have to wait until he reached the 8th stage and beat Fang Chaoyun and the others into submission. But before that, he had to get rid of Duan Wenqi. If he didn't teach him a lesson, wouldn't everyone dare to plot against him in the future? Senior Gu Nan. Zhuang Xian had already stood in front of Gu Nan at some point, blocking his path and staring at him without flinching. Even with Gu Nan's fierce reputation, Zhuang Xian didn't seem to fear him. This young man was actually very particular in his actions. Previously, when he tried to persuade Gu Nan to come to the profound clear realm, he didn't just address him as senior. If he was too humble, he wouldn't be able to make Gu Nan take him seriously. But in this meeting, he considered himself a junior and didn't want to make Gu Nan feel like he was isolating him. Given Zhuang Xian's inarticulate nature, he didn't seem like someone who was good with money and power. However, he was very clear about all of this. He would do his best to unite all the forces that could be united. In terms of being the head butler of the Heavenly God Society, Zhuang Xian had practically done his best. There was nothing to nitpick about. Gu Nan, Xueren said after a slight pause, think of the bigger picture. But even in the face of these two's persuasion, Gu Nan still walked forward without looking back. He walked past Zhuang Xian and casually waved his hand. When Gu Nan's figure completely disappeared, the Grand Sage Immortal Empress shook her head helplessly. His path has been too smooth. He hasn't suffered any setbacks. It's inevitable. Standing behind Duan Wenqi is Lu Wen. That's not a good choice for him to regain his confidence, said Xueren while shaking his head. In many people's eyes, there were obvious problems with Gu Nan's miraculous resume. If one walked too fast, it was inevitable that one's foundation would be unstable. In this world, not everyone who walked fast could walk far. It was especially so for geniuses who had a smooth journey. It was simply too common for them to be unable to recover from a setback because of a single setback. Since Gu Nan's debut, he had gained the upper hand in almost every battle. Even when facing Song Fei, Gu Nan had achieved his goal. It was exactly such a person who had suffered an all-out attack and lost most of his troops in one fell swoop. It was normal for him to lose his mind. From the perspective of the Grand Sage, Immortal Empress and Xueren, they could actually understand Gu Nan's feelings very well. Zhuang Xian could understand, but it didn't stop him from making the best choice. If Senior Gu Nan insists, then let him be. Everyone, just act according to the plan. The opponent has only placed one piece, so we can't lose our footing. After saying this, he performed the most standard of etiquette and turned to leave. The mobilization of the Heavenly God Assembly's resources couldn't be explained in a few words. Zhuang Xian still needed to strategize. This kid is a bit interesting. After Zhuang Xian left, the first person to comment was actually Crazy Fist, who was standing to the side. The Grand Sage Immortal Empress also said, "He's the same type of person as Ling Yang, even though he doesn't look like it." Taoist Ling Yang had a gentle personality and treated people humbly and courteously. Moreover, he had a clear view of the affairs of the world. He was the best candidate to lead and manage the Heavenly God Assembly. However, the disciple he had taught had probably only achieved half of that, politeness and character. But no matter how he looked on the outside, there weren't too many problems in terms of ability. Even the Grand Sage Immortal Empress was satisfied with him and temporarily gave up on the idea of fighting for a position. For someone of her status, fighting for the right to speak was indeed useful, but it wasn't to the point where it was absolutely necessary. Xueren revealed a faint smile. Even though Gu Nan's reaction was somewhat unexpected, He had established Zhuang Xian's position, so this trip wasn't in vain. Yao Luosher. The transfer of a portion of the Astral Gate's members was rather smooth. Without much trouble, they were all sent to Shijitian, which gave Duan Wenqi some comfort. In the face of Yao Luosher's ascension to the realm rank, these people could only do so for now. With his many years of experience managing astral gates, Duan Wenqi's ability to manage a world was actually not the slightest bit inferior to some peak star masters. If he hadn't wanted to ascend to the heavens in a single step, Yao Luosher would have long since ascended to the realm rank, or even the heaven rank. Now that Duan Wenqi's focus had been shifted back, Yao Luosher immediately entered a stage of rapid development. Relying on the flow of time that was much slower than in the origin world, Yao Luosher's internal structure was undergoing rapid changes. In an extremely short period of time, it had gone from a barbaric era to a semi-technological era. Of course, this couldn't be separated from the influx of a large number of Astral Gate members. After all, the Astral Gate was a peak organization in the All Heavens, and its technology was similarly top-notch. Inside the current Yao Luosher, one could already see buildings engraved with strange runes, sitting on a foundation that was also surrounded by runes. Duan Wenqi calmly observed all of this. The blue-robed youth, Fang Tun, was standing in front of him, reporting the progress of each task to him, just as he had done in the Astral Gate. Continue to support the human race, and teach them the method of raising the monster race, Duan Wenqi said. The potential of the human race's civilization isn't something those monster beasts can compare to. Yes, Fang Tun respectfully responded. Just as he was about to continue his report, he saw Duan Wenqi's expression change. Sir. Duan Wenqi frowned slightly, as if he was sensing something with his eyes closed, but in the end, he shook his head and said, It's nothing, continue. Fang Tun continued his report. In fact, what Duan Wenqi had sensed just now was a vague feeling that someone had entered Yao Luosher, but this feeling immediately disappeared without a trace. His first thought was that Gu Nan had come, but he immediately dispelled this thought. Because, logically speaking, other star masters couldn't hide their existence in other people's astral realms. This had nothing to do with the strength and characteristics of one's power. As long as one was in this environment and interacted with the outside world, they would inevitably be exposed. One might be able to hide from others, but they definitely couldn't hide from the Star Master, who was one with the astral realm. Duan Wenqi was very clear about this, so he chose to believe in himself in the end. However, there was an exception. The one who entered the astral realm wasn't the Star Master. Chapter 408 92 ZW Duan Wenqi would never have thought that what Gu Nan chose to throw into his astral world would be a rank 4 clone. Ever since Gu Nan had advanced to the 7th Order, he had rarely used his sage body. Now, he had once again made use of it like trash. Rank 4 mortals were better at hiding themselves than Star Lords. It was not that they did not interact with the outside world and were difficult to detect, but there were many such existences in the astral world. Star Lords were also humans, and their senses were based on their own judgment, not radar. If there was an extra drop of ink on a piece of white paper, they would naturally be able to detect it immediately, but if there was a drop of white paint, it would be much more difficult to distinguish, even if the other party's vision was as high as 5.0. Gu Nan's sage body descended on Yao Luosher, still holding the God Kingdom Pearl in his hand, and walked on the ground unhurriedly. Duan Wenqi's transformation of Yao Luosher was fast, but not thorough. The central area where he landed had already shown signs of metaphysical technology, but the remote areas were still wilderness. For example, in the area where Gu Nan was, monsters and giant birds could be seen everywhere. Above his head were 9 suns, and the ground seemed to be steaming. Good place, Gu Nan said with a smile. It was indeed a good place to place the God Kingdom Pearl. The function of the God Kingdom Pearl was to store a plane. It sounded very powerful, but it was still a little troublesome to operate. For example, the player had to enter the target plane and give the pearl a certain amount of time to take effect before it could really absorb the plane. After all, the original purpose of this item was for the player to keep the God Kingdom, not to fight against enemies. In the depths of the wilderness, Gu Nan randomly found a place to bury the pearl, and then let the sage body sit nearby. Almost at the same time as the pearl was buried, an inexplicable suction began to appear, as if there was a black hole buried in the ground, and the range of the suction was rapidly expanding. Even the body of a saint could feel the obvious strength. According to this trend, it would take at most an hour to store the entire Yao Luoshi. However, such a huge commotion would definitely not be able to escape Duan Wenqi's notice. In fact, he should have noticed it halfway through. In order not to be disturbed by Duan Wenqi, Gu Nan did not choose to take any protective measures. Instead, he planned to use something else to attract his attention. In the center of the demon Luo world, Duan Wenqi was still diligently directing his subordinate. Even Fong Tun was sent out by him. As long as he could raise Yao Luoshi to world realm in the shortest time possible, any amount of investment in the early stages would be worth it. However, at this moment, a giant palm suddenly fell from the sky and completely destroyed the foundation that had just been built. "Who is it?" Duan Wenqi flew into a rage and rushed over. Duan Wenqi had chosen rune technology for the astral boundary. The construction of the foundation was more difficult than the construction of the buildings, but it was also more expensive. This time, Duan Wenqi could clearly sense the location of the approaching person, and it did not seem weak. However, Duan Wenqi was unafraid. With his experience and strength, no one could make him retreat without a fight. Moreover, this was the Yao Luo world. With the support of the astral boundary, Duan Wenqi instantly locked onto the enemy's position and pointed the longsword in his hand at the other party. However, when he got close, he discovered the true identity of the enemy. It was Gu Nan. "So it's you." Duan Wenqi saw Gu Nan. It could be said that old and new hatred surged together, and he immediately gritted his teeth. However, his mind was incomparably clear. The other party was someone who could force the Tao sect world to bow its head. Even if he could defeat the other party, he could not stop him from coming. Thinking of this, Duan Wenqi immediately calmed down. Blindly chasing after Gu Nan was meaningless. Instead, it was more important to find out the other party's intentions. However, Gu Nan did not intend to give him this opportunity. Without saying anything, he smashed his fist forward. "Stupid!" Duan Wenqi sneered disdainfully and casually blocked Gu Nan's attack. His own strength was not weak. In his own astral boundary, he was at least equivalent to a rank 9 existence. He was completely unafraid of fighting head-on with Gu Nan. And Gu Nan's action of giving up his advantage in speed and running to fight him was undoubtedly seeking his own death. Duan Wenqi no longer had any intention of holding back. Behind him, the shadow of a large demon began to appear. It was clearly a half-fish, half-bird demonic beast. The large demon shadow spread its wings slightly and a terrifying power immediately fell on Gu Nan's head. Controlling the special abilities of tens of thousands of demonic beasts, this was the terrifying aspect of Duan Wenqi. However, Gu Nan laughed and actually ran away without looking back. Duan Wenqi was slightly startled. Then, he heard an explosion in the distance. It was clearly Gu Nan's handiwork. The other party's speed was too fast. Even the large demon's shadow could not catch up. Duan Wenqi gritted his teeth and quickly caught up to Gu Nan's footstep. However, Gu Nan had changed places. "Gu Nan, what exactly do you want to do?" In the end, Duan Wenqi could not be bothered to continue chasing. He stopped where he was and asked. If the other party wanted to rely on this move of wantonly destruction to force him to submit, then he was too naive. The construction work of Yao Luoshi had only just begun. It was not a pity if it was destroyed. As if his words had an effect, Gu Nan actually turned around and attacked him again. This time, he used the tactic of exchanging injury for injury. He did not care about his own body at all. Duan Wenqi was even more happy to do so. The terrifying power of the astral boundary could still cause damage to Gu Nan. He could not recover quickly. According to this calculation, half a day would be enough. Wait. Duan Wenqi was after all experienced. He immediately realized, was the other party's goal to buy time? As soon as this thought appeared, Duan Wenqi instantly sensed something strange in the astral boundary. Somewhere at the edge of the astral boundary, there was clearly a powerful suction force that was wantonly absorbing everything around it. Damn it! With a thought, Duan Wenqi no longer cared about Gu Nan in front of him. He directly opened up space and landed at the edge of Yao Luoshi. If not for Gu Nan, he would definitely have noticed the abnormality here long ago. Clearly, this was Gu Nan's true goal. What is this? Duan Wenqi stood not far from the God Nation Pearl. The powerful suction force was constantly attacking him, but it was not enough to affect him, the Star Lord. On the contrary, the strange scene in front of him attracted his attention. He gradually realized that what was in front of him might be an extremely precious treasure. He had never heard of a treasure that could absorb the energy of the world. Duan Wenqi did not hesitate and directly walked toward the center of the suction force. He did not choose to destroy or stop the absorption. Instead, he wanted to directly take the God Nation Pearl. How greedy! Gu Nan stood high in the sky, a cold smile on his face. Duan Wenqi naturally would not forget Gu Nan's existence. He dared to do this only because he felt that he could completely control Gu Nan in his astral boundary. After all, where Duan Wenqi was now, the suction force had reached a terrifying level. Other than Duan Wenqi, who could rely on the power of the astral boundary to stand, even Gu Nan could not get close unless he was willing to perish together with Duan Wenqi. Gu Nan shook his head lightly and turned to leave Yao Luoshi. Chapter 409. When Lu Wen received the news, the entire demon Luoshi had already disappeared. Dragon Altar Booknet. Even Duan Wenqi himself, as well as a portion of his Astral Gate members, had all disappeared without a trace. What exactly happened? Lu Wen's expression was terrifyingly dark. A group of people were kneeling in front of him. They were from different organizations. However, they all had one similarity, and that was that they had come into contact with Duan Wenqi before his death. Fang Tun was one of them. This blue-clothed lad was very lucky. Before Gu Nan appeared, his last mission was to leave the demon Luoshi, and he had coincidentally avoided this calamity. If he was still in the demon Luoshi, he would most likely have disappeared as well. My lord, he seemed to have discovered something. Fang Tun carefully recalled the scene, even imitating Duan Wenqi's expression. Unfortunately, the information he could provide was too little. He didn't know whether what Duan Wenqi had discovered was a person or an event. Lu Wen's expression was still dark. He had already gathered everyone who had come into contact with Duan Wenqi to question them, but he still couldn't obtain any useful information. What exactly happened in the demon Luoshi? After receiving the news of Duan Wenqi's mishap, Lu Wen's first reaction was that someone was seeking revenge. It was very possible that it was Gu Nan, who had just suffered a blow. However, he couldn't be too sure. After all, Duan Wenqi was a famous Star Lord, and the number of enemies the Astral Gate had provoked these years was not small. Now that the Astral Gate had been chased out of the purple Civ heavens, if an old grudge took the chance to make a move, and conveniently created such a situation, framing Gu Nan and the others was completely reasonable. Lu Wen waved his hand, gesturing for everyone to leave, while he sat back down with his brows furrowed. The huge silver dragon on his shoulder flew up, circling once in the air, before gradually transforming into a human form. As she gradually grew in experience, Longer seemed to have become more accustomed to her human form. She would often maintain her human form, and imitate others to discuss matters with Lu Wen. Unable to reverse time? Long Longer asked. She had heard the entire news, and naturally understood what had happened. Lu Wen shook his head. Even time has been completely devoured. A piece of the river of time has been emptied, and then quickly filled up again, but what's missing will forever be missing. As the controller of time, there were very few things in this world that Lu Wen was unaware of. He could completely follow the flow of time and see everything he wanted to see. But this time, even the laws of time had disappeared, and Lu Wen was helpless. Long Longer was stunned for a moment, then she pondered seriously. Could it be a plane collapse? I went to check on Yao Luosher's situation, and there is indeed a collapse point. The spatial collapse point was so obvious, it was naturally impossible for Lu Wen not to have considered it. However, he very quickly eliminated this possibility. A naturally occurring spatial collapse will last for a very long period of time. Old Duan wouldn't just sit by and watch his own star realm suffer a calamity. Lu Wen patiently explained to Long Longer. Lu Wen's thoughts far exceeded Long Linger's. A spatial collapse was indeed the most likely scenario. If it was artificially triggered and someone was found to stall Duan Wenqi, wouldn't that be the case? But in the Yaoluo world, how many could delay Duan Wenqi? Lu Wen had a good understanding of his old friend's capabilities. It was impossible for Gu Nan to do such a thing. Only someone on the level of Feng Chaoyun would be able to do it. And even if such a person really did take action, how would they be able to drag Duan Wenqi into a spatial collapse? Lu Wen understood Duan Wenqi's character too well. The latter's character could be very explosive at times, but he was an extremely calm person, and would definitely not let his emotions affect his decisions. The moment he realized that things were not going well, he would definitely escape at the first instant. There was no reason for him to accompany Yao Luosher in death. It was just a small star realm. With his old friend's capabilities, and his own help, how hard would it be to find another one? Various questions surfaced in Lu Wen's mind. No matter how he thought, there would always be something that he couldn't explain, causing Lu Wen to have an incomparable headache. Instead, Long Longer suddenly spoke after a long period of silence. Is he really dead? Lu Wen was slightly startled, before he suddenly stood up. Duan Wenqi was actually not dead. This Star Lord, who had been implicated by greed, was currently trapped together with the entire Yao Luosher within the God Nation Pearl, and was also trapped in the hands of Gu Nan. Within the God Nation, Gu Nan tossed the pearl in his hand, a faint smile hanging from the corner of his mouth. Old Duan. In order to seal you, I paid the price of a saint's physique. Gu Nan's original intention was to devour Yao Luosher, taking advantage of the fact that Duan Wenqi had lost the power of his star realm to teach him a lesson. After all, with Lu Wen around, it would not be easy to kill Duan Wenqi. Unexpectedly, Duan Wenqi was calmer than he had imagined, and had discovered the God Nation Pearl ahead of time. In the end, before he could even activate his backup plan, Duan Wenqi had taken the initiative to try and control the God Nation Pearl out of greed. Hence, Gu Nan had used the Saint's physique to knock him into the God Nation Pearl. However, with Gu Nan's current points, a mere Saint's physique was nothing to him. Instead, trapping Duan Wenqi in the God Nation Pearl gave him some new ideas. After all, he was a rank 7 Star Lord. If he could use him well, his second transition would be much safer. Teacher, everything is ready. Yan Xiaoxiao's voice came from the side, reminding Gu Nan that it was time to head to the Pantheon world again. This time, he was going to kill a god to accumulate sin points, and bring back Lan Si, Xie Yun, and Liang Ruxin, if the latter two had already succeeded in their jobs. Gu Nan nodded and got up. His gaze fell on Yan Xiaoxiao, and he could not help but sigh. Have you still decided on this path? When I return this time, you won't be able to turn back. Yan Xiaoxiao's face was the same as before, revealing a faint smile. From the moment I was born, I was destined to take this step. Perhaps in the eyes of others, Yan Xiaoxiao was no different from before, but as the owner of the God Nation, Gu Nan could not be clearer. In a sense, the current Yen Xiaoxiao could no longer be considered human. Her companions from back then had advanced one after another, but she had remained at the peak of rank 3. It was not that she could not take that step, but that she was unwilling. She walked a different path. She gradually merged her body with the God Nation, allowing herself to become a part of the origin. This was because from the very beginning, Yen Xiaoxiao was a part of the origin of the God Nation's predecessor, the immortal devil world, which Zhua Zhua had forcibly separated. What she was doing now was merely reversing the process. When Gu Nan advanced to rank 8, the God Nation would completely advance into a realm plane, and the human part of Yen Xiaoxiao would completely disappear, becoming the manifestation of the God Nation's will. If the God Nation was compared to a gigantic divine weapon, then Yen Xiaoxiao would become the weapon spirit of this divine weapon. When that time came, Gu Nan's control over the God Nation would also rise to an indescribable level. Div class equals other_links, txt download address, mobile phone reading. For convenience of reading next time, you can bookmark this page. Chapter 449. Chapter 410. After coming here a few times, Gu Nan was already familiar with the Pantheon world. Dragon? Altar? Book? Long Tanshu on the net, however, this time was different. Gu Nan did not sneak in. Instead, he entered the Pantheon world through the official channels. After Elder Z Luo's promotion, people did not refer to him as the 14th day because of the 10 years limit. However, the members of the Divine God Society no longer had to hide in plain sight. Before Elder Z Luo's rank dropped, the Divine God Society was still a popular organization in the universe. Gu Nan and the others could do whatever they wanted. Lord Gu Nan, please wait here. We will arrive at the Pantheon world tomorrow night, an attendant said respectfully as he stood in front of Gu Nan. Gu Nan, who had entered through the official channels, was currently on a giant cruise ship. The cruise ship did not sail on water. Instead, it traveled in the void, traveling between the two worlds. He had to admit that this kind of cruise ship, which could transport 1,000 people at once, was much more efficient than sneaking in. However, the same could not be said for individuals. At the very least, Gu Nan did not have to go through layers of checks and inspections. Since they had to transport 1,000 people at once, the cruise ship naturally had to slow down. This was the main reason for the delay. The attendant bowed and left. Gu Nan strolled alone on the top floor of the cruise ship, thinking about which god he should kill this time. Now that he had ascended to rank 7, there were many more targets for him to choose from. Unlike when he was rank 6, he had to go out of his way to find trouble with the Mirror Goddess. In theory, he had to kill a rank 9 god to accumulate enough sin points. However, killing a rank 9 god now would cause too much of a commotion. If it was possible, Gu Nan did not mind killing a few more rank 8 gods, or even rank 7 or rank 6 gods. If killing bosses did not drop equipment and only gave experience points, it was undoubtedly more efficient to kill normal monsters. Suitable candidates flashed through Gu Nan's mind. Each of them had a suitable event to trigger, so that these gods would be left alone. Just as Gu Nan was leaning on the railing, lost in thought, the sound of footsteps rang in his ears. "Save me! Sir, please save me!" At the same time as the footsteps, a woman's cry for help could be heard. Gu Nan turned around and saw a golden-haired girl. She was wearing an eye-catching pink dress that looked a little wrinkled. It seemed that she hadn't washed it for a long time. When Gu Nan saw her, he was slightly stunned and subconsciously said, "Elise?" The golden-haired girl was also stunned. She didn't expect to meet someone who knew her in such a place. From the girl's expression, Gu Nan could tell that she was the Elise in his memory. However, she was supposed to be from the Pantheon world. Why would she appear in a place like this? Gu Nan felt that many things seemed to have been disturbed again. The footsteps behind Elise became more and more hurried. She didn't have time to ask and hurriedly hid behind Gu Nan. A few uniformed men rushed over and their eyes fell on Elise, who was behind Gu Nan. One of the younger ones glared and reached out to grab Elise, but was pulled back by the older man beside him. This was the top floor of the cruise ship. The people who lived here were all real big shot. None of them could be offended at will. However, he had no intention of backing down. He believed that with his master's status, the other party would be willing to give him face. This woman is Taoist Qin Ning's beloved concubine. Please hand her over, my lord. Grotto Void Heaven will reward you generously. After the man stopped them, he said to Gu Nan in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Gu Nan's reputation was like the sun in the sky. However, not many people recognized his face. After all, he only came into contact with Big Shot. Gu Nan didn't take the other party seriously at all. The so-called Taoist was nothing more than the successor that Grotto Void Heaven was looking for. If Yu Lian encountered a calamity, Grotto Void Heaven wouldn't lose its inheritance. However, there were at least dozens of such Taoists. In front of Gu Nan, they weren't enough. Gu Nan completely ignored the person in front of him and turned to look at Elise. Why are you here? I came to the heavenly world with my father. Elise saw Gu Nan's serious expression and didn't dare to hide anything. Later, my father wanted to marry me to Mr. Qin Ning, I see. Gu Nan nodded and asked, Where's your father? Elise shook his head and said, I snuck out alone. The conversation between the two of them ended here. Gu Nan didn't have anything to ask for the time being, but he had a strange feeling in his heart. Elise had a quest line, and the trigger mechanism was that her father wanted to marry her off. However, in the original game, it was impossible for her to marry some Taoist. In other words, the plot was wrong. Elise came to the heavenly world, and the quest target became a person from the heavenly world. This change made Gu Nan very interested. He wanted to know what prompted all this to happen. However, before that, he had to deal with these guys in front of him. Sir, you heard it too. The man from before spoke again. This is a family matter between this lady and my Taoist. You go back and inform her father that if he wants his daughter back, he can come to the flowery divine kingdom to find me. Gu Nan patted Elise's shoulder and gestured for her to follow him. Stop. The seemingly hot-tempered young man finally couldn't stand this blatant disregard. He drew a long saber from his waist and looked ahead coldly. The next moment, he was instantly sent flying by a shadow. His figure instantly broke through the skylight and fell into the endless void. Countless void substances that were harmful to ordinary people quickly poured in, and the skylight was already covered with a layer of black fog. The heart of the elder from before couldn't help but skip a beat. Things have gotten out of hand, the alarm sounded in the cruise ship for the first time. Several cruise ship guards quickly arrived and began to repair the broken skylight skillfully. Obviously, it wasn't the first time they did this kind of thing. However, a deputy captain Lu Tao who arrived immediately was still very angry. He couldn't believe that someone had caused such a violent incident just after the cruise ship had set off. It was too big. Was this completely looking down on the owner of the cruise ship, Sir Zhou Jiming? Lu Tao looked at the older man with a gloomy gaze. Which family are you from? Didn't the ship tell you before that private fighting is strictly prohibited on the cruise ship? The older man had just had a companion killed and was scolded in the face by the other party. His face didn't look good. However, he also knew that the other party's status wasn't something he could compare with. He suppressed his anger and said, I am the sixth protector under Taoist Qin Ning. Just now, it was that person who started it. Please investigate it clearly. Who did it? Lu Tao said with a sullen face. The sixth protector quickly pointed to the side. It was the room Gu Nan and Elise walked into. At the same time, he was also a little happy in his heart. Even if it was an honored guest living on the top floor, he had offended two existences of the 13 heavens at the same time. Do you want to die? What he didn't expect was that after Lu Tao saw which room it was, he immediately blurted out. Then he waved his hand with a wretched expression. Tell your Taoist to get off the ship quickly. Otherwise, he won't even know how he died. Div class equals other_links, txt download address. Phone reading. For convenience of reading next time, you can bookmark to record this time text. Chapter 450 of the Dead. Chapter 411. Elise was also an interesting quest character. Dragon Altar Book net in the game. The reason why she was known was because she was a famous jinx in the world of pantheons. Her father had married her off 3 times, to a legendary powerhouse, a son of God and a true god. But none of the 3 could last until the day of marriage. From the moment they set up the engagement with Elise, they were destined to die a violent death. This phenomenon attracted the attention of many people. Some people thought that she had something related to misfortune, but the 3 sisters of misfortune denied this. At first, many people didn't believe it, but when Elise's 3rd fiancé, the god, died inexplicably, no one doubted the 3 sisters of misfortune anymore. To be able to curse a god to fall, even if the goddess of misfortune did it herself, it would be impossible to do it so discreetly. So in a sense, Gu Nan still saved the life of Taoist Qin Ning, although the latter might not appreciate it. How many fiancés have you had? Gu Nan asked as he brought Elise to a secluded place. The plot on Elise was also not fixed, and the extent to which the plot on her had progressed determined how much more Gu Nan could dig out. 3. Elise stammered. When she heard Gu Nan ask this, she knew that this person knew her reputation, and immediately felt a sense of shame as if she had been exposed. Gu Nan nodded with slight disappointment. Elise had already cursed the god to death, which meant that there was not much value left in her. Oh, there was one last thing left. The content about her background could attract a rank 8 god, so it was better than nothing. However, Elise's appearance here still made him more curious. Your father. I remember his name was Donald, right? Why did he go to the heavenly worlds? My father is Fox, Alexander Fox. Elise looked at Gu Nan angrily, then deflated. He felt that no one was willing to marry me over there, so he wanted me to try here. Elise's father, Don N. Fox, the old man whose name Gu Nan even remembered incorrectly, was also a pitiful fellow. His wife had passed away a long time ago, and he had doted on his daughter dearly. He had wanted to find a good husband for her, but in the end, he had brought up the number 1 jinx in the pantheon world. Perhaps this father would not feel good about such an awkward situation. Then, do you need my help? Gu Nan looked at the girl with a faint smile. If nothing goes wrong, it won't be long before you can get married normally. Really? Elise looked at Gu Nan in surprise. With her lack of experience, she had yet to learn to doubt him. Gu Nan smiled and nodded. He wasn't lying, but at that time, she might not be willing to marry. Dao child. The 6th protector stiffly stood in front of Qin Ning, his expression ugly. Old 9, I know about this. Qin Ning waved his hand to interrupt the 6th protector and sighed. Dao child Qin Ning looked like a young man with red lips and white teeth, but there was a touch of indifference in his expression, making people not think that he was just a young man. The old 9 mentioned by the 6th protector was the young man who had died in the hands of Gu Nan. Ever since the 9 protectors had followed Dao child Qin Ning, they had never been bullied like this. But looking at Qin Ning's attitude, it was clear that he did not intend to pursue the matter. The 6th protector felt a chill in his heart, but he did not dare to say anything. Instead, someone beside him said, Dao child, should we inform the sect leader? This person was also one of the protectors. Although old 9 had a fiery temper, he was usually quite popular. Now that he had been killed for no reason, his companions would naturally be filled with righteous indignation. Dao child Qin Ning coldly glanced at that person. What? You want to find the sect leader to avenge old 9? Tao Child's attitude made the person who spoke freeze, but he still forced himself to say, "That person looked down on my paradise. Do you know who that is?" Tao Child Qin Ning's words caused the surrounding people to fall silent. After Vice Captain Lu Tao had brought the person over, he had only spoken to Qin Ning. Tao Child Qin Ning swept his gaze around and saw that everyone's eyes were saying, "Say it, I won't be afraid no matter who it is." He could not help but shake his head. These people had followed him for too long and had forgotten even the most basic of cautiousness. They really thought that being born in the 13 heavens was enough to run amok in the heavens. Qin Ning pointed at the sixth protector and said, "Do you remember what this Tao Child's purpose in going to the world of gods this time, old six?" The sixth protector said without hesitation, "To pay a visit to the Spirit Sun Planet Lord and joined the Heavenly Gods Society." "That's right," Qin Ning said. "The sect leader does not allow us to interfere in the affairs of the Heavenly Gods Society, but there are nearly 100 Tao children in the world of gods. How can I stand out? It's just that I dare to bet." After saying this, Qin Ning coldly looked at the sixth protector. "If everything goes smoothly, that person might be one of my examiners. Do you understand?" The small incident on the cruise did not cause any trouble for Gu Nan, and no one dared to question him. Even the captain personally came to apologize after the incident, apologizing for letting a rascal come to the top floor and disturb an honored guest. Gu Nan was not interested in this kind of meaningless statement, so he waved his hand and dismissed him. With Gu Nan's current status and strength, no one would doubt his ultimate achievements. Apart from those whose levels were too far apart, no one would be blind enough to come to die. After all, even if Elder Zi Luo fell from power and Gu Nan directly ran to one of the 13 heavens, the latter would definitely be happy to accept it. The same was true for Song Fei. The next night, the cruise arrived at the world of gods. Naturally, Gu Nan brought Elise to the flowering divine kingdom. He first checked on the progress of the remaining 2 player legions, and at the same time triggered Elise's mission. As for which gods to kill, Gu Nan already had a rough draft in his mind. However, no matter who he was going to deal with, he had to accept those that were delivered to his doorstep first. "Mr. Gu Nan, will my father be here too?" "Of course, I've already sent someone to inform him." Gu Nan spoke casually to Elise as he stepped into the flowering divine kingdom. However, he saw a familiar figure. It seemed that Taoist Spirit Sun could not be called a Taoist anymore. He had changed into the world of God's native attire, and looked like a country nouveau riche. It was not just his attire, even his appearance was much younger than before. He looked at most in his early 30s, but with his own temperament, he had forcibly elevated his taste. "What do you think of my attire?" This outsider from the heavenly realms asked Gu Nan for advice with a straight face. "Pretty good." Gu Nan nodded seriously. "Only 300 years away from mainstream taste at most." Div class equals other_links, txt download address, mobile reading. For convenience of reading next time, you can bookmark, this time to record it text, Chapter 451 of War. Chapter 412. Although he often came to the Pantheon world, and even stayed here for a long time in his early years, things like culture were not so easy to accept. Cent pound dragon, cent pound altar, cent pound book, cent pound net. It was like a foreigner coming to China. No matter how many years he had been here, he would still be recognized the moment he opened his mouth. This was culture. The Pantheon world had its own unique culture. It came from the wars of the gods in ancient times, and then it developed step by step to the present. For example, can playing this really help me blend in? Taoist Spirit Sun held a black card in his hand. After being abused by Gu Nan for a few rounds, he finally asked with a puzzled look. "Of course." Gu Nan replied without any hesitation. "At the very least, you can use this to communicate with Sylvia. Culture is learned through communication." Taoist Spirit Sun thought about it and finally nodded. "Makes sense." Xie Yun's Krypton specialist route had been achieved, and Liang Ruxin seemed to be nearing the end, about to undergo the final assessment. The progress of the two did not exceed Gu Nan's expectations, but Xie Yun's compatibility with the Krypton specialist surprised Gu Nan. According to Lan Si, Xie Yun almost did not encounter any difficulties, and directly took over this strange route. Moreover, Xie Yun seemed to have an innate talent for converting everything she could think of into gold and throwing it into the route. She ran to a trenza, where the minerals are more abundant. Lan Si said helplessly. There was a large number of gold mines in a trenza. Obviously, Xie Yun was no longer satisfied with ordinary trade, and was determined to directly rob the gold mines. Gu Nan nodded in understanding. Krypton specialists could often soar in power in a short period of time, but would soon fall into a bottleneck. This was because in the middle and late stages of this route, the amount of gold needed was so terrifying that it would not even be enough to empty several main planes. But then again, this route seemed to be the most suitable in the Pantheon world. Unlike the man-made divine kingdom here, the Pantheon world over there was naturally formed, and there were many plains with gold mines, which was suitable for Xie Yun to plunder. I'll just bring her along when I leave, now let her do as she pleases. Gu Nan made up his mind and no longer cared about Xie Yun's situation, concentrating on arranging Elise's matter. Once Elise's reputation as a threefold fiancée spread out, she would not be of much use to him. Up until now, she had completed most of her quests, and only a few minor side quests were left. However, players were players because they could make the impossible possible. Lan Si. Gu Nan called the oracle over. Spread the news. By the time Old Fox rushed over, the news of Elise's marriage search had already spread throughout the entire Pantheon world. If it were the Old Fox, he probably wouldn't have been able to understand what a hydrangea was. However, this was not the first time he had seen such a custom after visiting the heavenly world. Just as they said, it was a great figure from the heavens who had snatched Elise away. Old Fox could not help but clench his fists tightly, his eyes filled with resentment. This damned fellow actually wanted to ruin Elise's reputation. Old Forks clenched his fists, his eyes full of resentment. Damn guy, he's going to ruin Elise's reputation. As someone who had married his daughter off 3 times, Old Forks was well aware of his daughter's reputation. If not for His Highness, no one would have been willing to marry his daughter. Now, that person was going to publicly seek a husband. This was like rubbing salt in the wound. Where's that damn guy? He invited you to the Flowery Divine Kingdom to meet him. How am I going to the Flowering Divine Kingdom? How am I going to the Flowering Divine Kingdom? For mortals, the primary world was their only living place, and the divine kingdom of the various gods was an unreachable existence. Unless they were guided by the oracle of the gods, there was no way to enter. Regardless of whether Gu Nan intended it or not, the news of him arranging for Elise's silk ball had spread. People did not know who was behind Elise. They only thought that this Jinx girl was desperate and had resorted to such a stupid move. Did she really think that a public search for a son-in-law would have people willing to come? Many people had the mentality of watching a joke, and the truth was exactly as they thought. The place where Elise threw the silk ball was also in a trenza, a new continent that was still in turmoil, so no one came. Amidst the laughter, a new piece of news came out. Although Elise did not find a husband, her silk ball was still thrown out, and no one knew where it was. It was said that it was accidentally obtained by a man who was already engaged, so this gentleman, who did not know Elise at all, also died a violent death. When the news began to spread, the world of gods was in an uproar. This was a divine weapon that could kill without leaving a trace. And the men who were engaged but had not had time to get married fell into a situation where everyone was in danger. Who didn't have a few enemies? No one wanted to wake up with a big red silk ball in the house and then live in fear. For a time, all the young men in Atrenza began a wave of marriage and annulment. Whether it was marriage or annulment, the purpose was the same, nothing more than to get rid of the identity of a fiancé. And because of the cumbersome procedures of marriage and the need for the woman's cooperation and other factors, marriage was naturally far more troublesome than annulment, so there were countless scenes of "don't bully a girl for being poor." What was even more terrifying was that within a few days, a big red silk ball really appeared in some young men's homes. The terrifying legend of the red silk ball thus spread in the world. "What are you doing this for?" Taoist spirit son, dressed up as a nouveau riche, looked curiously at Gu Nan. At this time, the two were sitting in a remote manor in Atrenza, and Gu Nan had also changed his attire, which was rare. He was wearing a luxurious suit, looking like a rich young master. It had to be said that Gu Nan's taste was still higher than Taoist spirit son's. Taoist spirit son was very curious about Gu Nan's actions, especially after witnessing him holding a son-in-law contest for Elise, and then personally making embroidered balls. That's right, most of the embroidered balls secretly circulating on the continent now were made by Gu Nan, and each of them was sold at a high price. Sometimes, he even specially arranged for the young men who got the embroidered balls to die to prove the authenticity of the curse. Could be said that most of the reason why the people of Atrenza were in a state of panic now was because of Gu Nan. "I need to kill some gods." Gu Nan had no intention of hiding it, since he could not hide it from Taoist spirit son anyway. Revenge. Taoist Ling Yang immediately thought of this because he had done the same thing himself. "No, no." Gu Nan waved his hand. "I just want to kill a god, no matter what kind of god it is." Taoist spirit son was stunned and asked again, "Then you can attract a god by doing this?" He had personally proved how difficult it was to attract a god to the main plane. Of course, he seemed to have forgotten that this time, when Gu Nan did a similar thing, he also seemed to feel no pressure. "Coming." Gu Nan did not answer him, but just said with a smile. Outside the manor, a woman in a light red cloak was slowly walking to the front of the manor. In the name of Her Royal Highness Emma, the woman's pretty face was full of frost. "Stop these foolish, despicable merchants immediately. div class equals other_links, txt download address. Mobile reading. For convenience of reading next time, you can bookmark this time." Chapter 452. Chapter 413. Which god is Emma? Taoist spirit son asked with slight surprise. Dragon Audiobook Network. He could be considered to know half of the world of gods, but he had never heard of the name Emma. There were only a few hundred gods in the entire world of God. For Taoist spirit son, who was at the same level, there should be no one he did not know. However, Gu Nan knew very well that Emma was an exception. In fact, not to mention Taoist spirit son, even the native gods of the world of gods had a large number of people who did not know of Emma's existence. To be precise, since the first War of the Gods, she had completely disappeared, and very few people came into contact with her. What was more interesting was that Emma did not deliberately hide herself. She just left the two major pantheons of light and darkness after that year, and announced that she would not participate in the War of the Gods. If there was a need for her to perform her priesthood, she would not be stingy to show up. It was just that for tens of thousands of years, there were very few situations that required her to take action. She was Emma, the goddess of love. Emma, goddess of love? Taoist spirit son carefully searched his memory and confirmed that it was the first time he had heard of this name. Emma's priesthood is love, Gu Nan said concisely, but because there is no god of marriage, the marriage part is also in her hands. This was the reason why the goddess of love's oracle appeared outside the manor. Gu Nan's series of actions had seriously damaged the normal marriage in Atrenza and damaged Emma's operation, so she sent an oracle to stop it. Of course, under Gu Nan's deliberate arrangements, the already somewhat muddle-headed goddess of love did not realize that all this was a conspiracy. From the information she received, It was just a mortal rich merchant who suddenly wanted to sell embroidered balls to make money after hearing the story of Elise. Although it was not the other party's intention to make the people of Atrenza panic and the plummeting marriage rate, she still sent an oracle to punish him and make him stop this behavior. After roughly understanding the whole process, Taoist Spirit's son could not help but show a strange expression. How did you know that this would alarm Emma? Gu Nan's series of actions were too purposeful, and Taoist Spirit's son did not feel at all that he was just trying, so he must have been confident. Gu Nan shrugged and did not answer. He couldn't tell the other party that this was a plot that was accidentally triggered by a bored player in his previous life when he was tormenting the Elise quest. Gu Nan didn't meet the god of love's messenger either. Otherwise, Emma would easily notice something was wrong. Under his arrangement, a legendary master who had long been prepared appeared and sent the messenger away in an extremely rough manner. Even though the other party revealed her identity as an oracle, the legendary expert still used a vulgar tone to scold her before sending her away. "Sir, I have completed your task." The legendary powerhouse Jordan stood in front of Gu Nan and said nervously. Not only was he afraid of Gu Nan, but he was even more afraid of the god's revenge. After all, his previous actions had truly angered the gods. Gu Nan was playing the black cards unhurriedly and easily crushing Taoist Spirit Yang. He casually said, "Are you afraid? Don't worry, Emma is a god with a fiery temper, she'll be here soon." Jordan was about to cry. Was there anyone who comforted people like this? However, Taoist Spirit Yang understood Gu Nan's words. Since she would be coming soon, she would naturally die soon. Old Fox was in Atrenza at this time. The continuous days of travel had caused his face to be covered in frost. As a mortal, he didn't have the ability to travel between planes. Fortunately, the cruise ship from the heavens happened to put him in Atrenza. "Mr. Fox, I have to remind you. What you're doing now is very dangerous." A man stood beside Old Fox and cautiously reminded him for the 20th time. This man came from Taoist Qin Ning's side and was one of the second protectors. He was specially sent by Qin Ning to Fox's side. It was also fortunate that this second protector was here. Otherwise, with Elise's current reputation, Old Fox would have been killed long ago. Now the two of them were going to the place where Elise threw the silk ball. If the second protector's guess was correct, that person was paying attention to that side and was even personally there was a high possibility that it was a place of death. "My daughter is there." Old Fox looked ahead with a firm gaze. At this time, there was only a little distance left to their destination. According to orders, the second protector couldn't stop Fox's actions and could only dissuade him, which made him look helpless. However, he didn't want to follow Old Fox to his death, so he could only try his best to persuade him. "That person clearly has a plan, you might as well wait until this matter is over. Who knows what he'll do to my daughter?" Old Fox displayed the stubbornness unique to the Atrensans and glared at the second protector. The second protector couldn't help but curl his lip. He really wanted to say that with that person's identity, if he really wanted to do anything to his daughter, no one could stop him. As the two were talking, there was a sudden throbbing in front of them, as if something was pressing down on their hearts. Old Fox looked ahead blankly, not understanding what was going on. The second protector was very familiar with this, and his expression was filled with horror. God, the goddess of love, had arrived. As mentioned earlier, this goddess with a very artistic priesthood was not low-key at all. It could even be said that she would explode at the slightest provocation. It was just that she had very few friends, and after the First Divine War, there were even fewer people who recognized her. Moreover, there were very few people whose priesthood overlapped with Emma's, so she became an invisible person among the gods. Today, however, Gu Nan had blasted the invisible person out. Emma was a blue-haired girl with an oval face. She wore a light red robe and stood in the void. "Mortal, you will be punished for your ignorance, superficiality," and a shadow appeared behind Emma, stopping the goddess of love's words abruptly. A bone-deep sense of danger made her tremble uncontrollably. It had been too long since she had experienced something like this. Since the divine war tens of thousands of years ago, she rarely had the chance to fight anyone. Normally, no one would be willing to provoke an eighth-order god. However, at this moment, her opponent didn't care about that at all, launching a fatal blow. Gu Nan's fist smashed down from the back of Emma's head, while his shadow power enveloped both of them, isolating them from the aura of the fight. To outsiders, they would only see a shadow. Taoist Spirit Sun stood in the manor, calmly watching the scene unfold in the sky. He knew very well that even Gu Nan would not be able to maintain this level of shadow power for long. In other words, Gu Nan was confident that he could end the battle in an extremely short amount of time. Taoist Spirit Sun had a strange look in his eyes. The opponent is an eighth-order god. What are you going to do? LT/PGT, div class equals, other_links, txt download address, mobile reading. To make it easier to read next time, you can bookmark this time to record it. Chapter 453 Death. Chapter 414. Priest Spirit Sun found it hard to believe that Gu Nan could tear a level 8 god apart with his bare hands. However, Gu Nan had done it many times. On the Dragon Altar website, Longtonshu, blue blood splashed out from the back of Emma's neck. Under Gu Nan's strange power, Emma's divine body began to crack. Who are you? Emma could not see her opponent at all. She only felt pain all over her body. She was being attacked crazily. Of course, she could not get an answer. Emma tried to run away from Gu Nan's crazy attack. However, she was never good at fighting, so she could not do it. However, no matter how slow she was, she understood that this incident was not a simple case of a merchant making a profit. It was a conspiracy through and through. It was a plot against her, a plot to kill her on the main plane. Emma had never been in such a difficult situation since the first war between gods. Her law was easily broken by her opponent. Her supreme divine power was useless. Her attacks were like stones sinking into the ocean. She did not even have the slightest reaction. Who is this guy? Emma was still in the mood to think about this question in such a desperate situation. Of course, this was not because the goddess of love was insensitive. It was because she believed that she would not die here, even if the enemy was extraordinarily powerful. You can't kill me, Your Excellency. Emma's voice gradually became emotionless. I think we should let go of the prejudice and talk. Even when facing an attacker who tried to kill her, she could still make rational decisions. The goddess of love was hot-tempered, but not crazy like Karina. However, Gu Nan did not respond to her kindness at all. Instead, he was attacking even more fiercely. More and more wounds appeared on Emma's divine body. Blue blood was flowing all over her body. She looked like a porcelain with blue paint. It's useless. In the end, Emma simply gave up and let her divine body be destroyed. Why do you want to kill me? Why don't we sit down and talk? I can help you. She looked like a caring big sister. For love? Your lover left you? Or fell in love with someone else? As long as it doesn't involve other gods, I can make any girl fall in love with you without reservation. Bang! Gu Nan's fist finally hit Emma's head, shattering her skull into pieces. Gu Nan seemed to have completely ignored what she had said earlier. I told you, it's useless. Emma's voice was still very calm, even though her vocal cords were damaged and her voice was starting to change. She seemed to have faced this kind of situation many times, so she was able to remain calm. The next moment, a pink mist rose and enveloped Emma's body. Her body was gradually restored. This process was not fast, and it was far slower than some true resurrection abilities. It could even be forcefully interrupted. However, Gu Nan knew how terrifying this ability was. It could only be interrupted, but it would never lose its effect. In other words, Cupid was immortal. The reason why she was able to survive the first divine war was because of this ability. Love is immortal. As long as love exists in the world, the goddess of love will never die. Love lives forever. Emma's head had completely recovered. Please stop your pointless attack, Your Excellency. The goddess of love could not be destroyed, not even by a super-main god like the Lord of Light and the public, or the players after their second profession. Gu Nan did not know the meaning of this setting. Perhaps it was just the game designer's bad taste, but he knew how to crack it. To be precise, it was not to crack the point of love lives forever, but to bypass this point to kill the goddess of love. Elise appeared in Gu Nan's hands, or rather, in front of Emma. Emma was stunned, not understanding what this meant. Your Excellency. Go, take back what you deserve. Gu Nan only pushed Elise gently, and the little girl with a blank face suddenly rushed toward the goddess of love's body. Emma, who was in the midst of recovery, was unable to resist all this and could only watch the little girl crash into it. I don't know if love is eternal, but you are certainly not. Gu Nan condensed a shadow longsword in his hand and stabbed it into Emma's brow without hesitation. A golden glow began to flash. That was where the divine spark was located. Under normal circumstances, only when a god died would the divine spark be exposed, otherwise it would never be attacked. Even Emma herself did not understand why the divine spark would appear at this time. Because of love. Gu Nan pointed to Elise, who was being led by the light emitted by the divine spark, and walked over step by step. Her body gradually overlapped with Emma's, and only then did Emma realize that the girl was extremely similar to her in height, outline, and physique. There is only one generation of the goddess of love, and it has been so since her birth, but this is not the truth. Gu Nan continued, and his words were like the sharpest blade, stabbing straight into Emma's heart. Emma seemed to realize something, and a low cry of horror came out of her mouth. No, Elise gradually merged with the golden light, and a strange glow began to appear on her face, which Gu Nan was very familiar with. This was divinity. For mortals, becoming a god was a very difficult thing. But for some people, becoming a god only required one step. Love may exist forever, but when the goddess of love's godhood was stripped, Emma was no longer eternal. Bang! Gu Nan punched down again, and this time Emma's head exploded like a watermelon, completely disappearing from heaven and earth. But in midair, the golden light on Elise's body was getting brighter and brighter. On the ground, Old Fox finally arrived. He shouted crazily into the air, "Elise! Elise!" Elise slowly opened his eyes and looked at the familiar and unfamiliar figure below. After a long pause, he said blankly, "Father?" Old Fox exhaled heavily. No matter what, as long as Elise was fine, it was fine. But Elise wasn't really fine. She was no longer the mortal girl she used to be. Now, she was the new goddess of love. There weren't many examples of mortals becoming gods in one step, and Elise was one of them. The reason was her mother. Even Old Fox himself didn't know that the girl he met in his early years was actually another incarnation of the goddess of love. In the first divine war, she fell at the hands of Emma, and from then on, the godhood of the goddess of love was exclusively enjoyed by Emma. But at the same time, due to the eternal nature of the goddess of love, her divine power did not disappear, but remained in the various main planes, and was even fused by some mortal women to create avatars. "Elise, are you okay?" The old man pulled his daughter in front of him and carefully examined her body to confirm that she was not injured. "She's better than ever." Gu Nan's voice came from the side, and at the same time, he looked at Elise. "Now you can get married, but I have to remind you. The person who becomes the husband of the goddess of love may encounter some strange things. You have to help him." Falling in love with the goddess of love was actually equivalent to interfering with the priesthood, and would be warned and punished by the rules of the world, unless the goddess of love herself was willing to influence the world. "And no one dares to marry me anymore, right?" Elise said calmly. After Gu Nan's publicity, her reputation had become even more deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. In theory, yes. Gu Nan nodded and looked at Taoist Spirit Sunday. By the way, did you say yesterday that there was some Taoist who wanted to join the Divine God Society? Taoist Qin Ning. He's not married yet, right? Div class equals other underscore links, txt download address. Phone reading. For convenience of reading next time, you can bookmark this time. Chapter 454. Chapter 415. When Taoist Qin Ning met Taoist Spirit Sun, Gu Nan wasn't interested in what would happen and what Taoist Qin Ning would do. Dragon Audiobook network for him. The most important thing was to successfully kill the goddess of love and obtain nearly 3,000 sin points. The goddess of love was more valuable than the mirror goddess. Although she looked weaker and was actually weaker, the value of a god's sin points wasn't measured by strength. Just like how the more difficult the monster was, the more experience points one would get. There were always other factors that affected the value of a god. The first factor that determined a god's value was their rank. Gu Nan needed to collect another 10,000 sin points to advance to the 8th level, which was more than enough to kill a 9th level god. However, if it was an 8th level god, he would need to kill 3 to 4. This was because each god had different sin points. The rank determined the quantity, and the amount of faith in the target's holy kingdom determined the specific benefits of killing a god. For a god like the mirror goddess who had been asleep for countless years and needed to rebuild her holy kingdom, she naturally wouldn't have too many sin points. The goddess of love rarely appeared in front of the world, so the amount of faith she could get wasn't much. It wasn't even the average level of an 8th level god. Not bad. Based on this progress, I'll reach the target after killing 2 more. Gu Nan estimated the average level of the gods in this period. There was a big difference between killing 3 and killing 4. The most convenient place to kill a god was, of course, the main plane. Going to a god's holy kingdom to kill a god would be difficult and risky. However, the gods weren't idiots. If the gods continuously perished in the mortal plane, no one would easily descend upon this plane again. This was also why Gu Nan wanted to envelop the battlefield with shadow energy and try his best to conceal the battle situation. Qin Ning agreed. This was the first thing Taoist Spirit Sun said when he arrived at Gu Nan's place. "Oh, that's good," Gu Nan answered casually. "Did you tell him the consequences?" "Of course. Do you think everyone is like you, who likes to trick their own people?" Taoist Spirit Sun glanced at him disdainfully. "He will return to the heavens soon, so it won't affect him that much." Gu Nan nodded. If Qin Ning wanted to return to the heavenly planes, she wouldn't be afraid of the suppression of the world's rules. After all, there was no love god there. However, Elise was busy receiving the legacy of the goddess of love, so he was afraid that he would not be able to go with them. The young couple was destined to be separated. "By the way, Qin Ning wants to visit you," Taoist Spirit Sun said. This was the first time Gu Nan met Qin Ning. She was no stranger to Gu Nan. After all, Gu Nan's reputation was too resounding. Taochild Qin Ning had a very good reason for coming here. Naturally, it was to apologize to Gu Nan for the offense his protector had caused him. Speaking of which, the whole thing was quite dramatic. Originally, because she didn't want to marry Taochild Qin Ning, she ran away on her own. In the end, she met Gu Nan, and in the end, she still walked this path. Back then, she didn't want to harm anyone, but now, it wasn't that she didn't want to. Just from appearance alone, this Taochild Qin Ning was quite good, and there wasn't the slightest flaw in his speech and demeanor. Most importantly, he wasn't a break-world person. He was a Star Lord. A place like Dongshu Sky, which was like 13 skies, could not raise a dozen break-world successors. Even if Yulian was willing to abdicate, what right did they have to reach the sky? Therefore, although there were close to 100 Taoists in the Grottovoid Heaven, there were less than 10 Taoists who had already advanced to become Star Lords. Qin Ning was one of them. He was already ahead of many people, but he wasn't satisfied. He wanted to be ahead of everyone else. With a God Lord as his wife, things would be much more convenient. As long as he could bear the consequences, this deal was worth it. Mr. Gu Nan. Daochild Qin Ning respectfully sat in front of Gu Nan. He lowered his posture and said, "Aside from apologizing, I am here for something else." Gu Nan knew this was the real reason for his visit, so he coldly said, "Speak." Qin Ning put on a serious expression and said solemnly, "Recently, in our Dongshu heaven, there have been some rumors about Sir Schwerin. Dongshu Sky and Extreme Sword Sky had a good relationship. That was because the two Star Lords had a good relationship. Now, Schwerin was a high-level member of the Sky God Union. Was his relationship with Old Man Zi Luo even closer than it was with Dongshu Sky? If one day, Schwerin became a fusing path, and Dongshu Sky and the Sky God Union became enemies, who would he side with? Unless Schwerin said something, as long as this suspicion existed, it would affect Dongshu Sky's attitude. After all, Dongshu Sky was not Yulian's star world. She had obtained the star world through inheritance. It wasn't her own effort. Gu Nan understood the root of all this, but he wasn't interested. He smiled and said, "You should tell this to Ling Yang or Schwerin. Telling me is pointless." "No, sir," Qin Ning said firmly. "You are the only one who can help Schwerin now." Without waiting for Gu Nan to reply, he continued, "As long as you are willing to stand up for Schwerin, the sect master can easily suppress those who oppose him. This is also the best opportunity for the Sky God Union and Dongshu Sky to make direct contact." Taoist Qin Ning's face was full of excitement as he said this. In a sense, this was the real reason why Taoist Qin Ning had come all the way to the world of gods to see Gu Nan. If he didn't want to make contact with the Sky God Union and Dongshu Sky, he could have found a way to join the world of gods. Why did he have to come all the way here? In the end, he needed someone who had a lot of weight in the Sky God Union and had a close relationship with Schwerin to stand up for him. In this way, not only could the suspicion between the two sides be resolved, but the Sky God Union and Dongshu Sky would also be able to directly contact each other. These two people were naturally Gu Nan and Qin Ning. Qin Ning didn't say this out loud, but he believed that Gu Nan would understand. Moreover, this was a win-win situation, so the latter had no reason to refuse. Even if Schwerin really wanted to distance himself from Dongshu Sky, it wouldn't stop Gu Nan from doing things. The calculations and guessing of the human heart within this seemed to be especially exquisite and trivial. Qin Ning had spent a very long time planning before finally standing in front of Gu Nan. Therefore, he was very confident in himself. "Why?" Gu Nan asked with a puzzled expression. Qin Ning's scheming expression froze on his face. He could only force himself to say, "Sir, if this succeeds, it will be a good thing for all parties. Whether it's the Sky God Union or Dongshu Sky, or yourself. Oh, look for Zhuang Xian for this kind of thing." Gu Nan waved his hand and said, "The disciple of that old man outside. Go to the Xianqing world and look for him. div class equals, other_links, txt download address. Phone reading. To make it easier to read next time, you can bookmark this time." Chapter 455. Chapter 416. Taoist Qin Ning left with a heart full of doubts, looking back every 3 steps. Dragon square root alter square root book square root net. Even before he left, he felt that Gu Nan must have some deep meaning behind his actions. He even probed Taoist Spirit Sunday. However, after Taoist Spirit Sun heard this, he laughed involuntarily and said, "Even if it's a gift, you still have to know what he wants, right?" A moment later, Taoist Spirit Sun came to Gu Nan's side and said with a smile, "This little guy should have come to find me." Of course, Taoist Qin Ning could not have known in advance that Gu Nan would come to the Pantheon world. His initial target must have been Taoist Spirit Sunday. After all, even if the latter was no longer in the Pantheon world, his position in the Celestial Society would not decline too much. He would still be one of the elders, just in charge of different matters. Gu Nan shook his head. He had no interest in Taoist Qin Ning's so-called benefit. What position in the celestial society? What opportunity to communicate directly with the paradise heaven? In Gu Nan's eyes, they were not worth mentioning. The interaction between players and NPCs was mostly limited to the mission-reward pattern. Except for some people with special hobbies, no one would go deep into communication. As for seeking a position in the NPC group, that was even more of a joke. Players only knew that if they were unconvinced, they would beat them until they were convinced. If they were unconvinced, they would beat them to death. So, do you have any other gods that you have a grudge against? Gu Nan turned to look at Taoist Spirit Sunday. He did not forget that Taoist Spirit Sun's ploy to kill Lewis last time was quite outstanding. Taoist Spirit Sun replied snappily, "No." After Taoist Spirit Sun left, Gu Nan finally began to concentrate on thinking about which god he should make a move on. If it was a player who developed normally, he would not have such troubles. This was because if he took the normal path to become a god, he would always have some enemies and friends. It was much more convenient to set up a trap around them than to catch people out of thin air. It was like using Elise to lure out the goddess of love. There were many like Elise, but it was not easy to find such a lure. Of course, Gu Nan's behavior wasn't without its benefit. At least he was like an invisible person now. As long as he didn't court death, very few people would pay attention to him. A moment later, Lan Si was called before Gu Nan. Lan Si's life had been very peaceful recently. As long as she kept an eye on Xie Yun and Liang Ruxin, she only needed to focus on her own cultivation, which was much easier than in the heavenly world. However, when Gu Nan placed a document in front of her, she knew that her peaceful days were finally coming to an end. There is a list here. Gu Nan pointed to the list and said, "Check the recent situation of these people and see if they have encountered anything strange recently." Lan Xiqian briefly scanned the names on the list and found that they were basically mortals. Even legendary powerhouses were rare, and all of them lived in the major main plains. Understood. Lan Xiqian did not ask any more questions and immediately responded, "But we don't have enough manpower here, time." It was not that they lacked manpower, but rather that Gu Nan had no influence in the Pantheon world at all. Ask Lingyang for help. More than half of Atrenza is already his. If he wants to rebuild the astral plane, it's impossible that he doesn't have manpower in the other main planes. Gu Nan thought about it and decided not to ask Lorenza for help. Now that she was a lord, if he were to openly ask her for help in killing a god, she might notice something and discover his identity as an evil god. Taoist Lingyang, on the other hand, seemed to have made up his mind to build an astral plane in the Pantheon world. Lan Xiqian took the list drawn up by Gu Nan and began to investigate the situation of the primer. However, just 2 days later, Gu Nan received another piece of news. Liang Ruxin had returned. "My lord." Liang Ruxin, who was carrying 2 swords on his back, met Gu Nan with a completely different face. If not for the similar facial features, Gu Nan would not have been able to recognize him. In the past, Liang Ruxin had weathered the vicissitudes of life, and his face had aged a little. He could be called a middle-aged uncle with a face full of stubble. Now, however, his skin was as fair as a woman's, and there was not a single callus on his palms. They extended from the sides of his cheeks, and his entire person exuded a decadent and demonic aura. "Are you sure you're a phantom sword saint, and not a successor of Sunflower?" Gu Nan asked, stroking his chin. Even Boluan Zhang himself had not cultivated to such a level. Liang Ruxin smiled bitterly. "Master swordsmanship is too profound. I can't comprehend it directly, so I had to split it into 2 and practice it one by one." "How do you split it?" "The sword is divided into yin and yang." At the mention of swordsmanship, Liang Ruxin's expression turned serious. "I first obtained the yin sword, then the yang sword. Only then could I master it." Gu Nan's expression turned strange. Although he had never become a phantom sword saint, he knew that there was no such thing as yin and yang in this path. In truth, this was Liang Ruxin's own understanding of swordsmanship theory from the Pantheon world. This was also a problem that Gu Nan had overlooked. The people of the Pantheon world were not players. They had their own worldview and understanding of the power system. Young contestants like in Tianxing and Xie Yun were easy to convince, but Liang Rusan had already formed his own view of the world. His talent and comprehension were equally high. It would be too much to ask him to obediently follow the path. But having his own understanding was not necessarily a bad thing. Perhaps he could achieve more in the future. Gu Nan was interested in the so-called yin and yang sword. He casually said, "Let's try using a sword." Liang Ruxin nodded and pulled out a sword from behind him. He knew the difference between him and the person in front of him was too big. He could not hurt him, so there was nothing to worry about. Plus, he had leveled up to Break World, so he wanted to see how good he was. The long sword Liang Ruxin was holding was shining with a dim light. It was a strange longsword that could steal people's minds. The sword itself was not strange. It had been infected by Liang Ruxin's power, which was why it looked like that. In the next moment, Sword Yin actually tore through space and appeared right in front of Gu Nan. Yet, it was still able to tear through space effortlessly right in front of Gu Nan. This was already something that many deities could not do. Gu Nan's eyes froze. That was not the power of the Phantom Sword Saint. It was Liang Ruxin's own understanding. When the sword Yin was about to hit Gu Nan, Liang Ruxin's body moved. He split into 6 and attacked from 6 different directions. It was the signature power of the Phantom Sword Saint. Interesting. Gu Nan grabbed one of the swords with one hand and let the other stab into his body. A smile appeared on his face. The sword's shadow disappeared. Only a few white dots were left on Gu Nan's body. Liang Ruxin was slightly startled, but he quickly recovered and quickly sheathed his sword. "Forgive me for offending you." Gu Nan waved his hand and smiled. "Do you know what your power is best for you?" "What?" "Assassin. LT/PGT. div class equals other_links. txt download address. Phone reading. To make it easier for you to read next time, you can bookmark this time. Chapter 456 Death. Chapter 417. Liang Ruxin's special class was more good than bad for Gu Nan. Dragon. Altar. Book. Net. The Phantom Sword Sage was a close combat type, so Liang Ruxin's position wouldn't change after he became a Phantom Sword Sage. However, his new ability was different. An assassin-type character could sometimes play an unexpected role. No matter if it was a sky or a god, it was a world where power belonged to oneself. If the top power was destroyed, it meant the group was destroyed. More importantly, Gu Nan did not lack people to fight in the front. He lacked people with special abilities. The next morning, Gu Nan called Xie Yun over. He asked her to fight Liang Ruxin. The result did not need to be said. Xie Yun had been looking for a gold mine. She did not care about Liang Ruxin, who had just broken through to the break world, but she lost 5 fights. In the end, Xie Yun felt dizzy. She made a few low-level mistakes, which resulted in her losing the last fight. After the two of them left, Gu Nan looked at Lan Si and asked, "What do you think about those two?" Lan Si answered without hesitation, "Xie Yun is stronger, but Liang Ruxin has more skills. He has more experience." Gu Nan nodded. With Lan Si's eyes, her evaluation of the two of them was correct. In game terms, Xie Yun was like a normal player with purple equipment. She could only play the game, but she was not good at controlling the game. Liang Ruxin was like a professional player with white equipment. His attributes were not as good, but he had more skills than his opponent. He had more experience. Experience varied from person to person. What Gu Nan wanted to tell Lan Si was the difference in their paths. "Don't think Liang Ruxin is more valuable than Xie Yun because of this," Gu Nan said. "No matter how good Liang Ruxin is, he has to learn it himself. Lan Si seemed to understand something. She asked in disbelief, if Xie Yun is given enough gold, she can reach level 5? In fact, even she herself was still stuck at the threshold of the 5th level. After all, this was the difference between a god and a human. It was just that Lan Si had the divine deity in her hands, so if she wanted to touch the threshold, it would be far easier than others. Even if she was stuck in front of the threshold, she would still be able to display a stronger battle strength. But Xie Yun had no threshold. That's right. Gu Nan smiled and said, as long as you charge money, you can become stronger. This is the only conscience of a money-scamming official. In terms of overall strength, the pay-to-win expert could only be considered an intermediate path. After all, players only needed sin points and sin points to level up. Moreover, this route almost didn't provide any combat methods. All the skills in this route were for pay-to-win services. However, for those who had to rely on their own cultivation, the advantage of a pay-to-win expert was incomparably huge. There was no bottleneck, no need for epiphanies, and they could level up just by topping in money. This was the dream of many. I'll bring her back as soon as possible. Lan Si had already realized Xie Yun's great potential, especially when coupled with the nearly infinite resources of the heavenly world. Gu Nan nodded and said, take Liang Ruxin with you. Let them familiarize themselves with their abilities as soon as possible. When I return, a new Divine Kingdom war will begin very soon. Lan Si left to deal with Gu Nan's name list. This was the only task she had left. As long as she reported the information to Gu Nan, she could return to the heavenly worlds as soon as possible. What Gu Nan didn't expect was that before the name list was settled, a perfect opportunity had presented itself to him. There's a small problem, and I might need your help, Sylvia said calmly as she held a cup of tea in her hand. This cup of tea naturally came from Taoist Spirit Sun, who was beside her. Otherwise, there was no such beverage in the Pantheon world. Oh! Gu Nan couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, curiosity rising in his heart. In his impression, Sylvia had never been a deity with a lot of tasks. Instead, she could be considered as the kind who stood aloof from worldly affairs. However, during this period, Sylvia had indeed rarely appeared before them, as if she had something to do. Taoist Spirit Sun seemed to already know something, and said with a smile, come to think of it, this has something to do with me. Sylvia glared at him in annoyance, and then slowly explained the whole story. This matter really did have something to do with Taoist Spirit Sunday. Back then, he had plotted to kill Louis. Although the process was somewhat different from what he had expected, the outcome was still considered ideal. After that battle, Louis had indeed died, and the Darkness Empire on Atrenza had also begun to fall apart. However, one person had survived. The pitch-black warrior Goro, a genius who had risen like a comet from a mortal to the realm of a deity step by step, was still active in the various major planes. Even Taoist Spirit Sun hadn't touched him back then. Not only did this person have many secrets, but it was also said that he was related to a certain important person from the Darkness Pantheon, and was definitely not someone easy to deal with. Of course, when it came to backing, no one could compare to Sylvia. However, this time, it wasn't her own matter. The goddess of night and moon, Diana, was one of Sylvia's few close friends, but now she had become Goro's mortal enemy. After Louis died, Goro left his camp and went on his own, Taoist Spirit Sun helped to explain. Taoist Spirit Sun explained, there was a treasure that was originally offered to Diana by the oracle, but it was stolen by Goro. Gu Nan frowned and pondered for a while, but he couldn't recall any entanglements between the two of them. If it wasn't for the deviation in his memory, Goro and Diana shouldn't have had any interactions, even though their laws were very close. Or rather, putting aside the part of Diana's divine title that belonged to the moon, it was reasonable to say that the two of them had the same divine title. Gu Nan, who was familiar with the game's background, was very clear that Goro's law was the night law, and there was a storyline that helped Goro become the master god of the night. It's something from that side, Taoist Spirit Son said. Of course, he was referring to the heavenly world. It was originally meant to be sent to Lewis. After Taoist Spirit Son said this, Gu Nan understood immediately. It was originally meant for Lewis, but by the time it was delivered, Lewis had already died in Taoist Spirit Son's hands. How could a treasure that Lewis fancied be given away for free? Since it was impossible for the other party to return the favor, there was naturally no need to give it away, so he might as well give it to someone else who needed it. Gu Nan understood the meaning behind this and asked, "It's a treasure related to the Night Law?" "Yes." Taoist Spirit Son nodded. "It was the Night King's saber from 7,000 years ago. I didn't expect it to become something that no one wants now, so it could only be sent here. Div class equals other_links, txt download address, phone reading. To make it easier to read next time, you can bookmark this time to record it." Chapter 457.